Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's special council meeting. We only have one item on the agenda, and it's to deal with the issue pertaining to the former Mayfair Hotel, and the withdrawal of notice of intention to designate. I do want to remind delegations of Council's procedural bylaw, and that delegations will be allocated a maximum of 5 minutes to address Council. And the clerk staff will ring a bell to indicate when a delegation has 1 minute left to make their comments. So I can ask people to start wrapping up when they hear the bell, but you'll still have a minute, so you don't have to take the bell as meaning that's when your time ends. We'll start with Mike Sealing coming forward and presenting his report. And then I'll be going to the delegations. I have 3 delegations registered, and then we'll be opening up the floor to questions after that of staff to answer those questions accordingly. And other than that, I think we're ready to go. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sealing. One more. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of Council. I will start by providing the background regarding my recent involvement with the former Mayfair Hotel building, consisting of 6 stories in building height plus a full basement, located at 11 Yonge Street. On Monday, April 13th, I received notice from Kitchener Utilities that over the weekend, a water service pipe had broken outside the building. The pipe had broken and it had flooded the basement of 11 Yonge Street. Upon hearing that, I asked building staff to investigate, contact the owner, do a site inspection, and find out some of the details. Upon learning that the foundation wall had been compromised with a hole, I'd instructed the property owner to retain a structural engineer to inspect the foundation and make a recommendation as to its repair or repairs. Mid-afternoon of that same day, I inspected the building myself to observe personally and verify if the building was unsafe per the Building Code Act. I can tell you when I walked inside the building it's vacant, it's unoccupied. The interior finishes have been removed. That's as part of a previous permit that had been issued by the building department. While inspecting, I observed 2 major structural issues. The damaged foundation had a hole in it, in the basement. The main floor has a multi-wide masonry pier supporting the upper floors, and it was bowing 6 inches into the building. So it wasn't bowing outside, it was bowing into the building. Both of these major structural deficiencies are located on the Yonge Street wall face, approximately the midway point from the front of the building on King and the back of the building at the rear laneway. The 2 items that I've just referenced are within 15 feet of each other. So you've got a hole in the foundation, and you've got a masonry pier, and they're within 15 feet horizontally of one another. In my professional opinion, the building was structurally unsafe, and I immediately took steps as precautions to protect the building and to protect the public, because that is part of my role as chief building official. I ordered city staff to fence off part of the sidewalk that was adjacent to where the concrete sidewalk had buckled. The sidewalk is about 5 feet wide, and we fenced off the area to prevent people from gaining access to that part of the building. In addition, the Yonge Street, or part of Yonge Street, was closed off from King to the back laneway of the building. That was closed off to minimize vibrations, vehicles, to keep the public away from the building in terms of the vehicles. I retained an independent structural engineer to complete a structural building condition assessment of the building based on what I saw on April 13th. The city retained MT Consultants, a well-respected and long-standing engineering firm in Waterloo Region. Mr. Kurt Rulin, a professional engineer, and he is MT's Operational Director of Building Structures. Mr. Rulin has 24 years of experience as a professional engineer, 10 years with MTE, and in my opinion, he's a leader of field of structural engineering for design, engineered solutions, and historical restorations. Mr. Rulin is a seasoned engineer and no stranger to preservation of historic buildings. On April 15th, I accompanied Mr. Rulin while on his inspection of the building for compliance with the Building Code Act and the Building Code. In total, I received 2 separate and independent structural engineering assessments confirming the CBO's initial assessment that the building is unsafe per the Building Code Act. The MT Structural Building Condition Assessment stated the building was in an unsafe and unstable condition, with some of the structural deficiencies posing immediate life safety threats. 2 of those life safety threats are the irregular 4-foot wide by 12-inch hole in the foundation, resulting in the wall being laterally unsupported. An immediate repair is required as it's in an unstable condition for the building. For example, a truck, wind, or a soil washout due to rain could lead to open up this breach and cause partial collapse of the wall. The foundation wall supports 6 stories of masonry, including the floors above. The main floor, 24-inch wide pier, has seriously deteriorated. The multi-width masonry pier supports floors 2 through 6, plus the roof load of the building. As noted previously, the pier is bowing inwards 6 inches. The pier is unstable as it's lost its ability to support loads and is also not properly shored and requires immediate repair. Again, these 2 items are within 15 feet of one another. Other unsafe structural deficiencies observed inside the building. The ends of the floor joists at the ground floor and second floors at the Yonge Street facade are framed into pockets of the brick masonry wall to provide lateral support to the wall and secure the wall from leaning. It's to keep the wall upright. In several locations, the deteriorated masonry resulted joist ends were visible. The joist ends showed signs of moderate to serious rot. Portions of the ground floor joists have settled 2 inches due to compression of the rotted joist ends. This is an unsafe condition because the wall relies on a tight connection with the joist and to provide lateral support to keep the wall vertical without leaning. Floor joists that are rotted reduce the ability to support loads and their own weight and also transfer loads to the exterior wall to remain vertical and allow the weight to be carried on to the foundation. Shoring of the floor joists is not possible. Shoring of the floor would start in the basement. If you were to shore the main floor joist, by putting a structure in, you would be adversely affecting the ends of the joists that are embedded into the masonry wall. That's what's keeping the wall from bleeding over. By installing a wall there, you're going to disrupt the poor masonry condition that's there, and the amount of wood that's buried into the top of foundation is not very good to begin with, as I stated earlier. On the floor above, you'd have to shore the same wall. In the same plane, you would shore the wall with another similar wall. The weight of that wall is going to compress the floor joist even further because the load's going to carry down. It's going to take some of the load off the exterior wall. That load is going to further compress the floor joist. Item number 4, The third floor has several steel beams carrying floor joists that appear to have partially pulled out of the Yonge Street wall. It appears a course of brick has been removed from the wall face on the inside, and the beams are bearing on less contact area on the Yonge Street wall. Similar to item number 3, the beams provide lateral support for the load-bearing exterior wall. The exterior wall, the steel beams provide lateral support for that exterior wall. Item number 5, the floor framing was compromised on all floors throughout the building. In many locations, the floor joists and roof rafters were notched, cut, split, or broken, and also fire damaged, and not properly repaired to code. Part of the second floor framing was cut. A ring joist was installed without supports. The result is the ring and floor are sagging, and that portion of the floor is unsafe. This area that's the floor sagging is within about 20 feet of the hole in the foundation. The roof is supported by a built-up wood beam in the center of the building. The beam is broken, it's sheared right in the middle, and is sagging. The ceiling joists below the cross bracing are actually supporting that beam. That's what's prevented the beam from falling down. These identified issues are life safety concerns for persons entering the building. Portions of the exterior wall on King Street and Yonge Street are in very poor condition, showing signs of significant deterioration. Yonge Street is showing considerable more stress compared to King Street. This is the reason why we've closed off Yonge Street and we have not closed off King Street. We don't see reason at this point to close off the sidewalk on King or even the street. On Thursday, April 16th, based on the assessments, I issued 2 orders based on my statutory authority as Chief Building Official. The first order was an order to remedy an unsafe building, and the second order was an order prohibiting occupancy. The orders were hand-delivered to the property owner, and they're also posted on the building. There are 2 requirements on the order. The first order is they need to, before the end of April 17th, the owner had to secure hoarding around the city sidewalk and part of Yonge Street. Our engineer was recommending a distance of 10 meters out from the wall. To further make it safe, we closed off the city sidewalk as well as that entire portion of Yonge Street. The second requirement was, prior to the end of April 21st, the applicant was to apply for a demolition permit to remove the unsafe condition. I'm here to say that the property owner did apply for a demolition application before the end of the 21st. The Building Code Act does not allow the Chief Building Official to issue a demolition permit if it contravenes the Building Code Act, the Building Code, or applicable law. The Building Code defines applicable law and includes Section 34 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Council now needs to withdraw the notice of intention to designate the property under the Ontario Heritage Act to allow the demolition permit to be issued forthwith. City staff are working with the property owner, and the owner has agreed to preserve and salvage the items listed in the report, provided it is safe and will not adversely affect the structure. I can honestly tell you that there is not a lot left inside the building, as all the interior finishes have been removed. In summary, the MT Consultants report stated the building is in unsafe and unstable condition. Both the breached foundation wall and the Boeing brick pier represent immediate life safety concerns. These 2 concerns are compounded by several other structural deficiencies in the building, and that demolition is the only viable option for eliminating the hazardous and unsafe conditions in the building and limiting risks to both workers and the public. As much as I would like the building to be remediated, the reference structural issues pose a threat for the building to collapse and place workers in danger. The April 11th basement flood damages are not the sole reason for the unsafe order and subsequent actions that I've taken. However, the water service break caused the reason for me to inspect the building. As chief building official, I acted on the facts with 2 independent engineered reports to support the decision and remedial steps, including removing the unsafe condition, as a public safety is paramount. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Sealing. I see 3 members of council have clicked in. As I indicated, we'll be doing questions after we hear from the delegation. So I've noted your 3 names. It's Councillor Singh, Councillor Yanetsky, and Councillor Fernandez. So I'll come to you first when we get back to Mr. Sealing with questions later on. Okay, well, that's fine. Well, thanks, Mr. Sealing. We'll now move on to our delegations. Everyone will have plenty of opportunity to ask their questions. The first delegation I have is Bernie Neimer. Mr. Neimer, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor Verbanovic and members of council. My name is Bernie Neimer. I'm the president of the Mayfair Hotel Development Corporation, which owns the building at 11 Yonge Street. I've been kind of silent up to this point. I don't have a lot to say, but just wanted to make myself available to answer questions to members of council and the public if they have any, and just to slightly straighten the record on some of the mixed messages I'm hearing through the media. Thought it's important that I at least make a statement about it. Firstly, the city had sold this property to Andrin Homes as a part of the city center development a number of years ago. Andrin and ourselves had worked together on this project redevelopment of the boutique hotel, and that was the intention at all times, to carry on with that development. This all happened prior to the transfer of the property or sale to me in 2013. So just to let you know, there was a lot of history prior to this incident and the transfer to myself. A number of plans, designs, studies, some of which you've seen either in social media or presented to you at council, historical impact analysis, traffic studies have been completed on this development. None of the design concepts could be really fully developed until we completed an analysis of the structure, which was required. We peeled back the finishes in the building. We obtained a permit to peel back the finishes to expose the structure, and this is where a lot of the issues that we're now presented with expose themselves. So 6 months and $250,000 later, the forensic demolition took a lot of money because I had made a commitment to the city not to remove any of the structure in the building, that only the finishes could be removed, which is exactly what was done. After the finishes were peeled back, a number of structural deficiencies were identified, and they were outlined in a detailed report which was completed by Blackwell Engineers. Fast forward to April 11th and the break in the water main adjacent to the building, and today we're here addressing the impacts of that incident and the structural deficiencies which can no longer be safely repaired without compromising the safety of the workers. The problem is far more complex than it appears. I mean, it sounds simple to try to preserve this building, but it's no longer safe to do so. Just to let everyone know, because there's some questions, that the building had been kept protected. It was protected from the elements, and whenever there was a roof leak or any other incident in the building, it was immediately attended to. I've been a very good caretaker of that property since I've owned it. The building is and has been monitored by Direct Detect for fire protection. All the covenants outlined in the sale agreement between myself and the city, I feel, have been complied with, as have the orders which were issued to me last week. And I know the other question is what's going to happen with the property, and I'm sure you all know that's a little premature at this point to figure out. All of the plans and tens of thousands of dollars have been spent on those designs is off the table. We have to go back to the drawing board at a later time. So that's all. I just wanted to let you know I'm here and available if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neimer. Any questions of Mr. Neimer? Okay, Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you for coming in, Mr. Neimer. I have a question for you.
Yes.
You said that it was $250,000 in 6 months.
Yes.
And that was only so you peeled back all the layers and you came to the outside walls. The lath and plaster was all gone. Everything was gone. So you were just basically the structure.
Yes.
When was that work completed?
We completed it, I think, about November of 2014. We stopped and then basically mothballed the project for the winter, built a heating around there were no pipes left in the building. The only pipes in the building were the water main and the sprinkler risers, which entered off of Yonge Street. A room was built around that pipe, insulated, and a heater was placed there. And from this break, you can see that, or from this incident, that the pipes are intact inside and we're protected.
Okay, we don't have any pictures to that. I haven't seen any pictures to that. So I'd be interested to see pictures if we have any. So you mothballed it in November of 2014, so that's 4 months. While the work was being done, wasn't any of these structural concerns identified at that time? I mean, was the bowing of the wall not seen? Were the beams that Mr. Sealing talks about not already compromised?
Well, sure, they became visible as we peeled back the structure, yes. And that column that we're speaking of, the demolition contractor, the main floor was the last floor that they peeled back, and I think you may recall it even came to council to remove the lobby that was in the hotel. A separate report was done on that to identify that it was not, in fact, historical, and built in 1980s.
Okay. I guess I'm a little bit kind of puzzled as to what's been happening in the last 4 months. I mean, if all of these structural deficiencies were already there,
yes,
and the water was not what created the additional structural deficiencies, why did you not come forward to council and inform us that the building was compromised?
I did. Not to council, but I did to staff. There is a report and an engineering report, and we met, the city and I met, over those issues.
And
as I said,
that?
Nothing was to the point that it was a life safety issue until this incident had occurred. Now it's a life safety issue. They were identified in the report, but nothing was imminent of the building falling down, or now that the foundation is compromised, it's created further stress and issues with the structure.
Can you tell me when that report was created by staff? We've never seen it.
It wasn't created by staff, ma'am. This was my engineer that completed the
And when
report
was-
for myself in December 2014.
Okay. So essentially what I'm understanding is that you had identified all the deficiencies, you had already alerted our staff about that, but nothing else was done after that, and...
Nothing else from a building standpoint, but surely there was a lot happening behind the scenes in terms of engineering and designs. We kept going with the redesign and redevelopment of the property, and up till last week, we were still working on designs with the architects and reviewing all of the various options. Up till last week, those options became, we started dealing with those options as a result of the report, saying, okay, here are the issues that we've got structurally. Let's take a look at the options to either fixing them, removing them. There were 3 options that were provided in that report.
Okay. I guess, so you guys were entering the building, people were going in and out of the building, and because of the flooding on April 11th, that has completely turned the building around, and now it's completely unsafe.
Absolutely.
And
That area of the building is absolutely unsafe. All of the erosion, all of the dirt under that sidewalk is inside the basement of that building at this time. You shouldn't really be stepping on that sidewalk, which is why it's cordoned off. Removing the sidewalk could be unsafe and unstable to that foundation and to the wall behind it. So it is quite dangerous, and that's why it's gated off.
Can you tell me what the thickness of that wall was, that where the water came in? Do you have
The
any
thickness of it?
Do you have any idea?
No, I would it's a rubble foundation wall, 110 years old. I don't know exactly the thickness.
I mean,
it might
they-
be in the report that, one of the engineering reports that was completed, but I've never measured it myself.
Okay. I'll allow other questions from other councillors. Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Yanetsky?
Thank you for coming in, Mr. Neimer, and providing your comments and opinions on this as well. Really appreciate it. But just to follow up on Councillor Fernandez's question, which I had similar ones, but just maybe to move it a step further. While you're doing all these renovations over the last year, how often were you yourself in the building to monitor its conditions or work with the architects and engineers, etc.?
Very regularly. I mean, we've owned several buildings in the core. I'm very heavily invested in the core, as you know, both in historical and regular buildings in the core. I'm downtown all day, every day, walk through and past the buildings very regularly, both with for the purpose of architectural design, engineering, or just as inspection. If we walk by a property, we absolutely go into it.
Okay, thank you. That's much appreciated. Once the flooding had unfolded and the engineers got involved, not the engineers, but the chief building official, and notified you, and they went through the building with the structural engineer, were you also in the building to see what the damage was with the engineers and the chief building official? In this?
Yes, I was, of course, the first one informed of the damage. I was at home on a Saturday, and the email came through from facilities at City of Kitchener that a water main had broken on the customer side of the property. So that meant it was my problem, and I immediately came down and I checked on the Bead Boutique, which I'd understood had some water damage as well. So I went in there and spoke to her first, then came to my office, which is adjacent to City Hall, and got my keys and went into the Mayfair and discovered that the entire basement was full to the ceiling with water. I then went over into 156 and 158, and there was about 4 to 5 feet of water in there on both sides, and water was pouring through the walls. Once I contacted my insurer, they had advised to get a hold of Paul Davis Systems, or they dispatched them, the emergency services. Had concern that the water was charged electrically because the entire electrical service for the Mayfair is in the basement, and it was now underwater. So I wrote to city facilities and asked for Hydro's contact information, emergency, and contacted them and asked them to cut off the power to the building prior to any cleanup being completed. So I attended again. I was there till about 11:45 on that night until they cut off the power to the building, and I made a decision that it wasn't necessary to start the pumping at that point. It could wait till morning. Everything was stabilized and safe at that point, and came back in the morning. The water had drained away, and I observed all of the layer of mud in the basement and approximately 3 feet of mud at the where the building pipe had entered. I didn't walk into the mud. I could just see it from the stairs. Then I contacted the City of Kitchener to let them know. I said I've got concern about the amount of rubble and debris in the basement, that it had to have come from somewhere, and obviously from under the sidewalk, and I was concerned with the amount of erosion that had taken place and the safety of that foundation wall and the pier beside it. So we came back down, they sounded off the road, decided at that point to leave the road open, poked underneath the sidewalk and said there seemed to be about a 5-foot void underneath it, and they were comfortable with the amount of barriers that they'd placed. Next morning, which was Monday, or the intent at that point was that they would arrive in the morning and lift those panels of sidewalk off to see what had happened. And the next morning when they had arrived, they decided, along with staff and utilities, that it was not safe to lift that panel in case it further compromised the stability or integrity of that foundation wall. And hence we're here today.
Do you own the property next door, 15658 King?
156 and 158. My understanding, and perhaps the city solicitor can clarify. When the property was transferred in 2013 to me, the 11 Young, 156 and 158 had all merged, and the actual address of the property, my understanding, is 158 King Street West. It's been identified as this portion of the building, and of course we're working to address this piece at this time, but we'll have to deal with legal at a later point and discuss what the actual legal description is.
Okay, and my final question to you is that having gone through the building with the chief building official and the structural engineer and what you saw from your walkthrough compared to the building after you've taken down the drywall and all the other stuff as well you're doing the renovations, did you see any change in the structural facility of the walls compared to what you saw back 3-4 months ago versus what you saw last week?
You mean since the incident? Has there been any change? I can't really say specifically. I mean, of course, you become paranoid and say, "Oh, there's a crack here. I don't know whether it was there before or not." I think that certainly that there's floor sagging and issues like that are obvious as you walk in there, and it is dangerous to be there.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Etherington?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Neimer, as a downtown councillor, first of all, thanks for coming in, and I would compliment you on the way you treat your buildings.
Thank you.
I had just one question. Leading up to these events, and since the water break, have you had any, have you gone out of your way to get an opinion or report from a heritage restoration expert on how to, first of all, how to go about maintaining and preserving that building, and since these incidents, to try and find a way to save the building?
No, I can honestly tell you I've been completely consumed with the orders to comply that have been issued, and there hasn't really been much time beyond dealing with those matters, the life safety matters, and getting the building down. There is no time. I think time is an enemy in this case. The longer we stand here, the higher the risk that it's going to fall down on its own. I think that I've been, as I said, spending the time trying to get organized and ready for what eventually is going to happen here, or potentially happen, if council decides to do so, is to bring down that building, and won't have a lot of time to deal with it. So that's where my attention has been, dealing with all of the orders, engineers, demolition contractors, etc.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But certainly you're a person who has a record and a reputation of heritage preservation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
I do. Thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks, Mr. Neimer, for coming in. My question is concerning about in December of 2014, and why did you mothball the project?
Mothball it in terms of just winterizing it, so we got through the winter and could carry on with the redesign. There was nothing to further do. It was stripped back as far as it could be stripped back. And as I said, up till last week, in fact, there's staff who've met with me up till last week discussing some of the redesigns of the building. So this is an ongoing process. It's not a simple property. It's as you know, it's historic, and there are a lot of complexities to it. And being where it is located, being that it's a public, or was in the hands of the public for many years, there has to be some consideration. I mean, there's been absolutely no consideration to the fact of the economics of this, and no one's spoken to it, and it's the elephant in the room. And I'm fine with that. But fortunately, you're dealing with me. I can deal with it, and I can bring it down safely and do what I need to do because you've ordered me to do so. So it's just fortunate that it's not just sitting there as a taxpayer's problem.
Okay. So during when you acquired the building in 2013, was there an engineering structural report done on your behalf?
No, not at that time. When the property was purchased from the city, it was, as I said, originally it was part of Andron's development. And how it became that we I think I actually did a presentation in front of many of the current council back in November of, I'm going to guess November 2012. At that point, when the new council had been elected, or many new members, I did a presentation along with a gentleman named David Stroop to show what our ongoing plans were for the property. Things were moving in that direction up until the peeling back happened and all of these structural deficiencies were noted. My thrust here has always been, sitting on committees at the city or just being a developer in this town, my thrust has always been to liven up King Street, get that corner live immediately, not as phase 3 of the city center development. And that was the whole point of acquiring the property and moving to get King Street, the retail level, alive. And immediately after we peeled it back, we noted that all of that gray infill brick, which you see, is actually structural, and the intent was to immediately get the windows in and get King Street alive. And that hasn't happened, and there's been a series of events since.
Okay. I don't question your integrity about whether or not you wanted to keep the property in the way it is and move forward with it. I think you do. I think your reputation is well
Thank you
spoken
very
for.
much.
Councillor Ioannidis, we're running out of time for you, so do you want me?
5 minutes has already been
Yep.
up?
Do you want me to come back to you?
Yes.
Okay, we can click in again. Councillor Singh?
Yes, I'll be quick. Mr. Neimer, you mentioned that December of 2014, after much of the peeling off of the building materials up to the structural wall, the deficiencies were noticed at that point. So was an engineering report done afterwards when you noticed those deficiencies?
Yes, the engineering report was done after the entire finishes were peeled back. Then we brought in the very next step was bring in the structural engineer, review everything, and work around the design. We had some previous structural design work done through Quadrangle, the architects working for Andrin. That was years ago, and they were incomplete because the finishes were still there. So we had to get to the bones of the structure to see how we're going to reconstruct it.
And some of those deficiencies were similar to what was earlier noted by Mr. Sealing?
Yes.
Okay. And you said that report, the structural report, the engineering report, was provided to staff in December?
It wasn't provided to them in December. It was completed in December.
When
we
was
had
it
a meeting in December about it and discussed it, and then they'd asked for further investigation on 156 and 158. So that's why the report never came to staff right away, because we sent them back out to go and complete an analysis on the adjacent.
Out of discussion with staff at that point, you're saying the report wasn't provided, but through discussion, you were explicit in outlining there were serious concerns with structural issues in the building?
Yes, they were all outlined in the report.
Okay. And that was with the building department?
It was several, not just building, there was several different departments there.
Okay. Was there inspection thereafter by the building department to take a look at some of those concerns that were raised at that point?
No, not until this incident. There was no need to until this incident happened. Everything was stabilized. I mean, it wasn't imminent. Now it's an issue. You can't get in there and repair anything.
I see. Okay. So there were no recommendations given or orders given to you that these deficiencies needed to be repaired or rectified, even though you had outlined them in December or with conversation. Was there ever a report handed to staff after December, the structural report that was done?
Yes, I provided that just around this incident.
You didn't provide it before?
No.
Oh, I see. Okay. Was a new report done as well, or?
Yes, after the incident, as Mr. Sealing has said, that as of the date of the incident, he'd ordered that a report be completed. So that was done and provided immediately.
Okay, so after the incident, 2 reports were handed then?
Yes, ours and
No,
MT's.
two reports, meaning the one that was done back in December.
Well, that was provided just prior to the incident.
Oh, I see. Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Marsh?
Thank you, Mr. Neimer, for coming in and for your, responsible attitude about it. I just want to ask you, when you mothballed the property back in November, December 2014, and you had concerns raised by your structural engineer at that time.
Yes.
Wasn't it recommended to reinforce the structure at that time?
It's again, I'm trying to answer sort of preemptively. We're talking hindsight now that this incident has happened. Okay, was it? It's part of the redevelopment. This is a normal process. There's nothing unusual of what happened in terms of what steps you take here. In any project I've ever done, this is the process. You don't. If it needed immediate shoring, yes, there was a temporary shore there. Was it perfect? No, it's not perfect. But was it imminent? No. Now it is imminent. Right. Now it's been compromised.
I'm just trying to understand how we got to where we are.
Yes.
When we knew there were concerns at that time. And
I think you used the word mothball a little loosely. Mothball meaning it was winterized and made weather tight and protected for the winter to get through the harsh period of the season. But there was ongoing design work, as I said, happening in that time. It wasn't just forgotten about.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, there don't appear to be any other questions right now, so thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Our next delegation is Lisa Harmey. Welcome, Ms. Harmey.
Hi. Thanks for having me come in. I contacted council and also the ACO when I unfortunately heard about the status of this project. I am a registered UK architect. I practice here in Ontario with a BCIN as a designer. I focus substantially on smaller buildings, which is my choice. Post my registration, which is 97, I have approximately 11 years of relevant experience in this situation. In terms of existing and designated buildings, I've experienced both in the UK and here. I worked for a practice called Theron Curran Architects in downtown Hamilton. William Curran has received several awards for his role in the retention of the Lister block. When I heard about the situation, I felt that I had some relevant points to make and some information to share with you with regard to what constitutes best practice in attempting to pull off these kind of projects, this kind of fine-grain urbanism, which is so important to the health of cities at the moment and so relevant, actually. In addition, I spent 3 years doing design review at the City of Vaughan, and we had many projects with substantial heritage components come before us at that stage. And I will say that we did always look for expert input on those projects, simply as a requirement for best practice and something that we should be aiming for. And the field of heritage has developed enormously in the past 20 years. The field of development and engineering is a dynamic one, and it does evolve. So I'm not sure how I'm doing. I really don't want to run out of time here. Let's see. Okay. So I've been a member of the ACO in the past. I've reason to be concerned at the apparent sudden and impending proposed complete demolition of the former Mayfair Hotel in Kitchener downtown. Among my concerns is an apparent lack of expert input to the condition reports. An engineer is recommending demolition in totality as the only option on an economic basis, perhaps. There is a quote in MT's report which says, structural deficient building that's not economically viable for reuse. I would expect to see that sentence in a feasibility report on a regular building. Not on the building, which is all but designated, really. This seems remiss. His risk assessment, as I see it, is given without qualification as to the limits of his knowledge. Now, of course, as any consultant does, in the portion at the end of the report, the consultant's report, and this is MT's report, because obviously Blackwell's report hasn't been made available to anybody with the extreme speed in which this has taken place as well. There was no time to ask for it under freedom of information or whatever, so we have limited knowledge. However, of course, at the end of the report, the consultant informs those who commissioned it that this is simply his judgment. However, I do feel that within the context of this work, MT consultants do not hold themselves out as experts specifically in this kind of project. They are a very large company. They have substantial experience, geotechnical, remediation. They have been involved in heritage projects, of course, but what I'm trying to say is that they specifically, by themselves, do not hold themselves out as especially expert in this area. There are 3 consultants that come to mind: ERA Architects, FGMD, Fournier Gerswitz Maltstrale, who've just completed a project in St. Thomas at the Courthouse, and also Goldsmith Borgel, who completed retention on a steeple in a church in Keenan, Ontario, which was condemned by 3 engineers' reports not that long ago.
Is that it for your presentation?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, that was a bow, was it
Okay,
not?
no, you had a minute, so you have 30 seconds if you had
Oh,
any.
do I? Well, I do have. See, I have a substantial number of questions then to follow with. Principal among my questions is: we've heard nothing about facade retention as an option. It's a common practice. We know that the Yonge Street facade is critically damaged and may in fact collapse, although I believe that we are protected in the event that that does occur. It wouldn't be the end of the world. But I haven't heard anything about retention of the King Street facade, for example.
Sorry.
That's
No,
it.
yeah.
I'm also
Go ahead.
concerned
Go
about
ahead.
the
You can just
adjacent
wrap
property.
up. Go ahead.
I'm
wrap up.
also concerned about the adjacent property at the moment. I mean, it appears in the notice to designate, but then it's crossed out, so I guess it must have fallen off the concerns at that point. But just going past it myself, often enough, we have existing structural steelwork which is not designed to be exposed to the elements. In fact, there is a stanchion, and I can see through the deteriorated sandstone to its base, and that has surely been exposed during snow this winter. With your freeze-thaw cycle, that's just not a responsible thing to be doing. So, there's a lot of questions, really.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I see several members of council have some questions for you. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair. One question. Lisa, could you take your time, give this council a few more examples in Waterloo Region and Ontario where extensively damaged and compromised heritage buildings have in fact been saved and preserved, and give us your opinion on whether that could happen here in relation to the Mayfair.
Well, I mean, I really, I have to be careful. I'm not, despite having a certain amount of knowledge, I'm not in a position to be giving peer review on the condition reports that you've been given, and I'm not really in a position to comment technically in detail on this project, but I do know that the Bower Lofts was substantially supported while the work was going on it. I do know about a project in Doon, which one of the former councillors brought my attention to during the course of the week, which was flooded too, whose basement was filled with sediment that had to be supported. It's not so uncommon to lift up entire, smaller, admittedly, buildings and move them. Seagram Lofts, for example, which was completed by Straka, who I believe were purchased by MT subsequent, carried out extensive facade retention. That was propped substantially by itself. I mean, it stood up by itself. The floors, I mean, I can at least say that timber floors, very often in a building, they perform a role of retention, which we all know for the walls, but the walls have some integrity of their own, and timber as a material is often sacrificial. It deteriorates, it falls apart, and it's not uncommon to find that that joists are short of walls, and that, it's...
Okay, thank you. Councillor Yanetsky.
Yes, a couple of questions. In your introduction, I didn't quite catch it.
I'm sorry.
You have a background in terms of your line of work with engineering or architecture, or what?
I'm a registered UK architect. I registered in '97, and probably in this field, post-registration, I have about 11 years' experience. In Ontario, I practice with a BCIN, Small Buildings BCIN, which I do by choice. But you can imagine, obviously, as I was in the UK, practicing in the UK for a long time, I more or less from the beginning of my career, in fact, from the beginning of my career, I've been dealing with existing buildings. So I do have a degree of knowledge to share. And here, as recently as last year, I worked on 2 projects, one of which was designated and the other of which was an assemblage of church and leisure buildings. I was working on those with a practice here called ThinkForm.
So in light of your presentation, in simple, a few words, what are you looking from council to do?
I believe that council, if council is involved substantially in development, I think it's unfortunate with regard to this project that it didn't form part of a deal with the developers, that it didn't form part of the transactions with developers, in fact, which is what is very commonly seen. But I do think that when council is involved with development, it needs to pursue best practice. And I think that you really have to hold out for the best standard of advice. There are organizations that even provide that pro bono. And I do think for the owner, I am a little mystified as to why taking on the risk of a existing building like this. Blackwell routinely partner and engage additional expertise for heritage. So I don't understand why it's taken so long. For Heritage to a really good expert to look at this building. But that being as it is, I think now I don't see the need to rush unduly. I don't see that it's best practice to overly rely only on the recommendations of structural engineers anymore in the field of heritage. And I think you should seek further advice.
Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for coming in. And I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
using some examples, more recent examples. But with your background in UK buildings, and so you've seen some pretty old buildings that have probably seen some serious decay that have been restored. Would that be a good statement for me to make?
Yes, it is. I have actually here in Ontario, I've never actually had to be in a situation where a building, where I was either personally at risk or where a building was literally on the verge of collapse. So it's limited what I can say about that. I will say that on one occasion in Hamilton, I was on site and I saw a building which I didn't think, I felt it probably should be demolished, and it did duly collapse about a week later.
With your knowledge for the last 11 years that you've been working on historical buildings, could you possibly give us an idea of the thickness of the wall for a building of this age?
Well, I would imagine it's at least 0.5 meter, because those rubble walls, I have to be, I can't claim absolute expertise, but those rubble walls are often made of very large stones. So what size is a large stone? I would be very surprised if it isn't at least 0.5 meter. And when you ask that question as to the thickness of the wall at the base, all you're looking for is an indication. So I would be very surprised if it was less than 0.5 meter, and it could be 1 meter.
Okay. Water can do a tremendous amount of damage, as you're probably well aware.
Yes.
And they're talking about a 4 foot wide opening.
It's about 1.5 meters, isn't it? And it's 1 foot high.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that something that you have ever come across, or that you are familiar with? Would it take a tremendous amount of force to go through a meter, 0.5 meter wall?
You see, I'm not a structural engineer, so I can't say that to you, but a wall which is that tall is held in place by force of gravity in any case. And rubble, rocks obviously have a tendency to take support from each other, so they probably have reached a point of stability nonetheless. And then the wall itself is being given retention support by the timber joists. But, I think that definitely advice should be sought, and if in the event the wall does under controlled conditions collapse. Well, that would be what happens. But this building has more than one facade. And I would also be concerned as to what the position of the adjacent building is, because it's continues the language. So, and it was also curious to me. One of my questions, I was interested to know how the addition is actually supported, because there's no information. The MTE report doesn't contain really much technical information. It simply makes a statement. It doesn't contain any drawings. There are no sections. We can't see, for example, how that additional extension is supported. So I don't know if that extension has a separate kind of columned structure, which is parallel to the wall, or if it's actually also sitting on the wall, and how that detail.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming in and for giving your comments.
You're welcome.
Councillor Schneider?
Yes, thank you so much for coming in. Noticed in your email you said you have experience with renovation and repair of older and designated buildings from both your jurisdictions and where you've practiced. I'm wondering if you can explain to myself and council what the difference is between a regular structural engineer report and one that would be done by an architectural conservancy technical report.
Well, you know, for example, you'd see when a building is not designated, you'd see that weighting of the economic value of replacement, the economic value of a new building versus the existing building, and you'd see them weighing that up. But when a building is designated, it's been assumed that there's some value. And that is not to say that it should be or that it can be supported economically indefinitely, but the evaluation is different. So the basis of evaluation is different.
But maybe I should have been clear. I'm speaking in more terms of the structural integrity of the building.
Oh, I see. You mean.
So these reports are saying things are unsafe and unstable. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if.
Yeah, I guess what that comes to basically is really, you would normally have architectural input as well as engineering input, because that gives you a holistic view. Structural engineers in general see buildings as abstract structural diagrams. That's their education, and that's their job, and that's how they see them. But an architect, for example, will go into, in far greater detail, the weathering of the building, the detailing of the envelope, for example, and what the thermal implications are. They will go into life safety in greater detail, because they do the code analysis, so they deliver the assessment on the safety of exits and circulation. They will get more involved in building fabric replacement costs. They will have a greater awareness of the building's situation within the community and the cultural context, of course. I mean, there is a big difference, usually in the level of detail, actually, with regard to construction.
Okay, I was just in terms of structural integrity. They would see it as unsafe, as what the differences are between their view of things, their study of the building.
I'm not sure how to, because the structural assessment is always part of the heritage expert report. So it's kind of, you get that and, I suppose.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Those appear to be all the questions. I just have a couple questions for you, and thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us. Clearly, you've had experiences in architect and a passion for heritage. I guess what I'm trying to come to, an understanding of is how do I balance a couple of your comments? One being that you acknowledge you're an architect, not a structural engineer, and not in a position to give peer review or comment technically is what I believe you said, but then also said you don't see a need to rush in terms of the decision. And so I guess I'm just trying to come to terms with that in terms of the decision that council needs to make.
But I did say that I don't see the need to rush, because I'm aware that we have the ability to safeguard the public in the event that the building should come down. The building, there's a hoarding around the building. I mean, those measures have been taken. So it's
Okay, that's fine. If that's
Does that?
well, I guess what I'm trying to come to an understanding of is at what point do you believe there is a need to rush or to make a decision?
If there was an immediate risk to anybody's safety, such as somebody obviously on the pavement adjacent to a wall that was about to fall.
But I guess, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's that critical. And I think what's actually missing, by the way, from the report is any kind of grading of risk. I mean, I don't have, for example, a plan in front of me with a red area and a pink area denoting where the areas of greatest risk are. So there's no weighting of the risk. It simply seems to be instantly off the scale, and I would be sceptical.
Okay, thank you very much for coming in. Our next delegation then is KLG from the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. Welcome, Ms. LG.
Thank you. As you know, I'm president of the North Waterloo Region branch of Architectural Conservancy Ontario, a provincial charity whose mission is to encourage the preservation and reuse of structures, districts, and landscapes of architectural, historic, and cultural significance. Yesterday morning, you received a letter from ACO manager Rollo Myers offering the services of ACO's preservation works to bring in an experienced heritage professional for preliminary expert advice on the Mayfair Hotel. And further to that, ACO North Waterloo Region would urge you to change the question you're asking from should we or should we not demolish this building to what would it take to remediate the damage done by the water main break and make the building structurally sound. So nothing is really impossible from an engineering stance. Look at the Bauer Lofts, as Lisa reminded you. They suspended the original factory with column and beam shoring while they removed the contaminated soil from beneath it. And then Homer Watson's birthplace, another example she referred to, was another impossible save. That building was in real trouble because it sits in a floodplain. It had at least 6 feet of water in the basement. It needed a new roof. The foundation was ready to collapse, needed redoing. The walls needed repairs. It needed new wiring. It was, to most people, a disaster. But fortunately, the owner, Mr. Loney, was convinced by numerous acquaintances and history buffs to bring in, to have a preservation works assessment completed. In this case, it was by John Rutledge, an architect who now works out of Blythe, who said, yes, keep it in place and restore it, but it's going to cost you money, so see if you can find some grants. And today, it does stand in its mostly restored state because Mr. Loney's son took on the project with his own time and money and this advice. And another building, kind of a worst case scenario, is the Fine Arts Building or Adams Theatre in Detroit. But it again illustrates when there's a will, there's a way. In that case, the facade was saved and they built a new, it was shored up from within with a grid of columns and beams and diagonal reinforcing. And locally, that's pretty much what Marie Voisin is doing with the Imperial Hotel restoration in New Hamburg. She wrote on her blog, when all the drop ceilings, plaster, and layers of floor were removed, weakened beams, missing posts, and joists that weren't long enough were revealed. It was like looking at a patchwork quilt of poor workmanship. Before we could begin building inside, we had to have a structural analysis completed, and it was determined that a new steel structure was required. So that's where we've been building a steel building within the old hotel. So basically a new skeleton inside the building. So Marie did say it was really discouraging, but the fact is, it is and it can be done. So we have 2 questions for you. We wonder, did Mr. Sealing ask MT Consulting for recommendations on what it would take to repair the Mayfair Hotel to make it structurally sound? And if not, will you ask for this advice from a professional experienced with heritage buildings? Because there is a special expertise that develops from people who work a lot with heritage buildings, of knowing the techniques and the past experience of seeing these kind of impossible saves. And I think the taxpayers of Kitchener have invested a lot of money in the Mayfair Hotel over the years. And there were, and there still are, sound reasons for that. So why throw it away without at least investigating what it would take to save it?
Thank you very much. There's a few questions for you, Ms. Elgie. Councillor Ioannidis.
Yes, thank you for coming in. You did mention about an expert of preservation works, and this is part of a service that your organization would provide. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a preliminary assessment. I wouldn't put it on the same level as a detailed structural analysis, as a consulting engineer. But it is a very valuable service, and it has saved a number of buildings that were considered lost causes otherwise.
Okay, and who pays for this? If the building owner was to contact your organization and to have this, would it be up to his expenses to pay for this, or does your services offer this for free?
It's done at a minimal cost. I unfortunately can't give you a figure. It might be under $1,000. It kind of depends on the extent. And it's been paid various ways in the past. Sometimes the municipality has done it. Sometimes the building owner has done it. Sometimes people have rallied to raise the funds for it. That's kind of up to, I guess, council to give advice on that too.
Okay. You did mention some grants and stuff. Is there anything possible for the building owner to find grants?
Again, I know that for designated buildings, there are options through the Waterloo Regional Heritage Foundation if the building's actually designated. I know they will consider that. I know your own city, Kitchener, again, has a very good program for repairs to heritage buildings too.
Okay, but the one that we have here, they're pretty insignificant in dollars, and my concern is you did compare an example of New Hamburg, and knowing the owners there, they have resources more than enough that any individual can do what they need to do. So this is a different situation, and I think you need to balance it out. So, in my opinion, if your organization can provide some kind of financial stability and affordability for this building owner, then I think that's where your organization be leading to.
So I think I'm not sure I'm totally understanding your comment, but I mean, I think the point we're asking you is to get this opinion on what it would cost, an analysis of work that needs to be done, and then jump to the conclusion that it's, affordable or not affordable or so on. Okay, so if the building owner was to go and get this preservation works and what that details comes out is something that's extraordinarily expensive, what would your opinion still be? I think that would rest with the owner to make that decision. I think right now what we're asking is that you ask the question, what would it take to make the building structurally sound? And to ask that as opposed to what's the situation right now. Because as I said before, anything's possible. And it's a question of looking at how to make that possible and then deciding from there.
Okay, thank you.
We have 7 more people with questions for you. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you, Kay. I appreciate you coming in and advocating on behalf of our heritage, as you always do. Councillor Ioannidis asked the question about the cost, and you've responded to that. There's been a number of properties that were listed in the letter from the ACO, and you have talked about the ones that were done within the city of Kitchener. The Bauer Lofts you mentioned, that was
that was not a preservation work. Preservation Works was not involved in that. That was to my knowledge, anyway.
Okay. So I guess my second question would be is what other ones have Preservation Works been involved in? There were several that Rollo Myers mentioned to you. The Bothwell Town Hall in Chatham, Kent, was one that
was evaluated and eventually brought up to current building codes. The Paisley Inn was one that was declared a public risk due to its deteriorating state. And similarly, the Masonic Temple in Goderich was very badly damaged. And then he also mentioned the steeple of the United Church in Keene, where 3 separate engineering opinions had recommended taking it down. But a further report by a heritage architect experienced in working with this type of building resulted in it being saved. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Kay. Obviously, Kay, you would support a move to obtain some type of expert restoration report from a heritage expert before the Mayfair is flattened. I just wondered, how do you, and you've probably already faced this, but how do you respond to those who would be legitimately concerned about public safety while that report and subsequent efforts take place?
Well, I would expect that there would be recommendations, and I would certainly be asking that of anyone. If I were commissioning the expert, I would be asking them for the immediate steps that needed to be done, because anyone who has a heritage building, even a house such as I do, know that these things do sag. They do need support from time to time. It's something that happens to the buildings over time. So I'd certainly be asking for that advice right off the top. What needs to be done in the short term to shore this up,
Okay. And based on this incident and others in regard to Kitchener's record when it comes to preservation of heritage buildings, do you or your organization have any concerns about other downtown Kitchener heritage buildings based on what's happening here?
Well, the buildings most at risk are always those that are unoccupied. So that is, if we looked around at buildings that weren't currently occupied or sometimes are not being well repaired. So the specific buildings, but no, I think the big question is, you have a property standards bylaw with pretty good provisions in it, but is it being enforced? Are those the buildings that are on your list of designated buildings and listed on your municipal register of being of cultural value and interest? Are those being regularly inspected? Because that's one of the biggest threats to heritage buildings, is just the fact that they aren't occupied and aren't regularly cared for, and that's a concern, of course.
We've just completed an inspection of all downtown buildings looking for just that. So thank you for coming.
Glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Thank you for coming in, Ms. Algie. In response to a question that was asked by Councillor Fernandez in terms of the cost of the review, which you didn't have an answer, I've been in communication with Olo Myers this morning, and he emailed me back just about an hour ago or so and said that the preliminary cost would be about $300. But again, it's the low cost, and it's a preliminary expert advice on that without getting into the full details. And if maybe it doesn't suffice to answer the full question that the structural engineer had, but it just provides an initial context of an opinion, I would gather. So I don't know whether it goes far enough or not at this point in time. I do have to agree also with you in terms of your comments that, yes, the Waterloo Regional Heritage Foundation does provide funding subject to going through a process and application, and that may take a bit of time, but we have a matter of urgency here, so I don't know how that'll fall into this situation. The question I have for you is that you illustrated a number of properties of where remediation has taken place of buildings that were in critical situations where they were fixed up and improved and rehabilitated. But in this particular case, we have an unsafe condition where it's the jeopardy of any people who may have to come in, and specifically workers, to try to, you say, well, maybe we can shore up this and try to hold it up. But as the chief building official pointed out in his presentation, that if you're trying to shore up one, you may structurally move something and another part will collapse, which endangers the workers there. In those examples that you used, were those unsafe conditions?
Yes, some of them had been that, and that's where, again, I think it behooves you to call in someone who has experience with heritage buildings, and particularly with heritage buildings that have been deemed structurally unsound and unsafe, to advise. And I am sure that not all preservation works assessments resulted in yes, go ahead. But I feel that that's an important next step here, to get that peer review, if you like, or a second opinion from someone who has the experience in working with these buildings, because they were built differently back in the day.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Ms. Algie, for your continued interest in heritage in our community. And I want to ask you, considering that nobody is allowed entry into the building at this point, how would you recommend that, or how would you see just the logistics of how an expert opinion could be offered, given that they wouldn't be able to enter the building? Do you think that would be, so in other words, would it be fair to say that they'd be able to offer their expert opinion with just the paperwork that's been done already?
I feel like I'm kind of grasping at procedural things that I really don't know about, but I would imagine that there would be some discussions with the chief building official. Obviously, a number of people have been in the building to look at it, and there may well be things that weren't included in the report, such as areas of the building that are more or less dangerous to be in. So that I wouldn't think that we would be endangering someone's life here. And certainly, my reading of the report was that the danger was greatest, it was felt, for people who would go in to try and repair this, as opposed to people just plain entering it. But I may have misinterpreted that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Gazzola.
Just a brief question. Do you know, with your experience, how quickly a third review could be undertaken and started and finished?
I know Rollo Myers told me that he had a couple of people who were ready, who could come in very quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Galloway-Steelock.
Yeah, my question was mostly asked by Councillor Marsh. So something else you said is something about getting a second opinion, you said. Would it not be the fourth opinion that we would be getting, because we have two?
Well, you may have seen the other two, but the public has only seen MTE.
Well, we have an opinion from MTE, we have an opinion from our chief building official, and there's an opinion from
We've seen two then, yeah, two of the four, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear that this would be the fourth one that we would be seeing.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Good point.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the point about people entering the building. The cost of things notwithstanding, I think a big concern is the safety. So in MTE's report, it literally says that changing loads, including wind or rain, could cause a collapse, not shoring up the base. Things like wind or rain or trucks driving by could cause a collapse. So I just want to make sure that you're understanding. If my understanding is if you're asking for someone to be able to have access to the building, do you think, does that change your perspective?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question very well.
Certainly. In MTE's report, it mentions conditions such as like wind and rain, trucks driving by, as potential causes for the building to collapse.
Right.
Okay. If we commission an expert, and I think the question's been asked me to clarify, if we commission an expert, can they provide, a fourth opinion without entering the building?
I can't answer that. I'm sorry. It's not a line of work I do, but I do know that if you have a gaping hole in a wall, it weakens the wall. If you can support that wall another way, it strengthens it again. That's about as far as my engineering knowledge goes, though.
Okay. I felt important to highlight the seriousness of the question. Thank you.
Okay.
I mean, you'd have to ask Mr. Myers or the Preservation Works people more about this. I'm sorry, I can't answer that for you.
Okay, thank you. I have just a couple quick questions for you, Ms. LG. Just further to Councillor Galloway-Seelock's question, I'm just wondering, in general, in this particular instance, we know that the property owner has gone and had the one report done that we haven't seen, but our staff have. We know that our staff commissioned a report that has been shared publicly, and we know our staff also gave their professional public opinion. I guess I'm just trying to understand, will the next one be enough? And then at that point, what if that opinion matches up with the other three, then I guess we proceed. What happens if it doesn't? Do we then sort of look for a fifth one to see where that one lands? Or I'm just trying to understand what the thinking is here.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, and I think Lisa Harmey referred to this as well, we aren't aware if the people doing the report had special knowledge and experience with heritage buildings. So I think if we had another opinion, I won't number it this time, that from someone who did have that expertise, that for me personally, I would feel satisfied that we had examined this more carefully. I think that's the missing piece right now. And also the missing piece is, of course, what would it take to save the building? It sounds like there's a lot of work, but what would it take? That's the other thing that I would like to know.
Okay, and just in your report, you reference a couple other buildings where there were reports, or sorry, not in your report, but in the ACO's letter.
Yeah, in the ACO.
To us, there's a couple other buildings that were referenced that are now being renovated, and then it also references the United Church in Keene, as well as Devereux House in Georgetown. So while the pro-demolition opinion obviously wasn't deemed ideal, Devereux House now, if I understand correctly, has gone on with the work of other engineers and proceeded, and the Conservancy is happy with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a preliminary assessment. It's and it's usually brought in to assist often communities that are struggling with this tough decision about what do we go? Is it worth pursuing further? So it just provides that preliminary assessment, and yeah.
Okay. One other question? No? There's one more delegation. Okay, that's fine. That would be all then for now.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. LG. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Would the last delegation be the consultant from MT, or do we have a chance to?
No, the consultant is not a delegation, but the consultant is here to answer questions when Mr. Sealing needs the consultant to get engaged based on any of council's questions. That would be the opportunity to do that.
I just want to, and you can tell me procedurally if it should happen now or later, because there seems to be a lack of knowledge specifically around the experience that the MTT consultant has with regards to heritage. Is that something that we could deal with now, or would you prefer that wait until we have questions of staff?
I'd say let's hear from our last delegation, and then we'll deal with that issue first.
Thank you.
Okay. Last delegation is James Howe. Welcome, Mr. Howe.
Thank you. Actually, it would be of great interest to me to know the heritage experience of the MTE consultant.
Well, that information will be shared shortly.
Then my comments are being made without that knowledge and without additional knowledge that Council's questions of Mr. Sealing may inform me.
Okay, Mr. Howe, I'm giving you an opportunity to make your presentation. We said at the beginning that we were going to be hearing and asking questions of staff afterwards, so please continue with your presentation and you can factor that into your comments.
Okay, well, I just would like to be as informed as possible.
Okay, thank you.
And,
We'll make sure you have that information.
But my comments won't be informed by them. That's the problem.
Okay, Mr. Howe,
okay.
I'm trying to give you an opportunity to please proceed with your comments.
Okay. My intention was to come today, if I was able to, just as an interested observer. I saw the demolition of the Mayfair as being regrettable but inevitable. I think, but I'm always open to changing my position based upon new information. The new information that I have is from the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, and particularly its local chapter, and knowing that there have been other buildings that required demolition that have been preserved. And this is where knowing the MTE consultant's background would be helpful, because although he has been described as being no stranger to heritage buildings, I'm not sure if he has the same level of expertise as the type of people that have been referred to the city via the program that was referred to by the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. On the assumption that he is not a full expert who works in that field and specializes in that field, I believe that the city should pause long enough to get that expert opinion and see if there is a viable way to save the hotel. I trust that if the building was in danger of imminent collapse, this meeting would have happened much sooner, and we would have proceeded already with the demolition. So I'm led to believe that we have enough time to bring in a higher level of expertise to determine whether this building could be saved, similar to other buildings, other examples that we have of proceeding, of saving them despite their structural concerns. I would like City Council to take under consideration that in this case, the city really does have a very strong responsibility to this building. The city owned it for 12 years, up until 2 years ago. The city decided that the building would be unoccupied for between 2007 and 2013. Had redevelopment occurred or started to occur 2 years earlier than it did, 5 years earlier than it did, or more, I don't believe we would be here today. Had that building been occupied between 2007 and 2013, I don't believe that we would be as likely to be here as we are now. So I think that the city owes it to the building to take a very strong expert opinion very quickly to determine whether demolition is the only option. And in closing, I would hope that the city learns some lessons from the Mayfair Hotel. I hope that it will proceed more proactively with the former Legion building that the city owns on Ontario Street and see it occupied with some kind of use as soon as possible, and that they're more proactive proceeding with getting it redeveloped or having something positive occur in that space, so that we're not sitting here talking about the demolition of that building at some point.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Howe. We have one question for you. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, do you understand that it's not within council's purview whether or not that building gets demolished or not, that what we're discussing really is with the notice of intent to designate?
Yes, I understand that perfectly, but essentially what's council is deciding is whether to remove the heritage protection that has been afforded the building, which has essentially the same result. Because the building has that heritage, at least the intent to designate, I believe that council should make sure that experts in that field have had their opinions considered and not just engineers that have had their say so far.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, those are all the questions we have. Thank you very much, Mr. Howe. So we'll now ask people to click in for questions of our staff. But before we do that, I'd just maybe ask the consultant to come forward and perhaps just share with us your expertise in this area so we can get that clarified right away.
Thank you for having me. Just quickly, I will freely admit I am not a specialist in heritage designated buildings. I design an awful lot of buildings, mostly in Waterloo region. Most of them are new, a lot of them are renovations, a lot of them are additions. I do have specific heritage experience in this region and without. Specifically noted two buildings that have already been noted. The Seagram Lofts, where the facade was preserved. I did not work on that project, but the engineer internally who peer-reviewed my report was the engineer who did that work. Devereux House, which was mentioned as a building that was condemned, that was restored, that was my project. I did the restoration work for that project, the structural engineering to preserve that building. Other local buildings that people might be familiar with that I have worked on, either from an assessment or a repair perspective. Brubaker House on the University of Waterloo, I've done some restoration work there. The Grad House on the University of Waterloo. The Eby House, which was moved from one location to another, I reviewed it prior to its being moved. And most recently we did a restoration of a century-old building in the downtown of New Hamburg. So I'm not a stranger to century-old buildings, historic buildings, but I will freely admit I'm not a specialist. I spend an awful lot more of my time doing new buildings.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll now ask Mr. Sealing to come back forward, and there's lots of questions for you, as you probably can imagine. We'll start with Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks, Mr. Sealing. Just for perspective for the audience and residents that are maybe listening, can you just give us a quick background of yourself?
I graduated from Conestoga College in Construction Engineering Technology in 1986 with a diploma. I'm a certified engineering technologist with the Ontario Association of Certified Engineering and Technologists. I'm a member of the Ontario Building Officials Association. I'm a certified building code official with the association. I'm currently their president of the association. Upon graduating from school, I worked for 5 years for a local architect, and for the last 23 years, I've been employed with the City of Kitchener Building Division.
Okay. My other question is, in the past, have you had any experiences like this that had some heritage designation or listing?
I have worked on, so over the 23 years, yes, I've worked on other buildings in the City of Kitchener that have been designated and century-old, projects such as the Joseph Schneider, the Sherg Residence, and in 2005, the Foresight Building.
Okay. And some of those other buildings that were referenced by some of the delegations, were you aware of those projects at all and what those circumstances were?
If you can just clarify which projects
guess,
within Kitchener or projects?
Within the region, I guess.
I'm familiar with some of the projects, yes.
Were they in a similar situation as what we are facing today?
The project that I can recall that stands out that was in similar condition would be the Foresight building. But all the other projects that I was involved with, we did not have to order demolition down because it was imminent.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Sealing. With all due respect, I think you're the best in the industry. Thanks.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks, Mike. I know you have a wide variety of expertise, so I hope you know that my questions will not target your expertise, but really just to make sure that there's clarification and some clarity around this situation. Do you have an understanding about what the size of the pipe was that did the apparent damage to the basement?
So as a result of my inspection on April 15th, there are 4 service pipes penetrating the foundation wall. 2 of them are beside each other. One's a 4-inch diameter, one's a 6-inch diameter, and there are 2 other abandoned 2-inch diameter, plus or minus diameter pipes.
Okay, so two 2-inch diameter, but they were abandoned. Does that mean there was no water flowing through them?
Correct.
Okay, so it was the 4-inch and the 6-inch?
So my correction. In terms of there's 4 water service pipes penetrating the foundation wall. The 6-inch diameter water service pipe is the pipe that had a break somewhere between the outside of the foundation wall and the valve, and that's the water that flooded the basement.
Okay, thank you. You made the order on Thursday at 3 p.m., is that correct?
I hand-delivered the order to the property owner on Thursday afternoon.
Were you aware, or could you explain to me why there were people removing items out of that building between 3:30 and 4 p.m. of that day, and later I had to leave where I was sitting to go to another meeting?
So I can't explain. I hand-delivered the 2 orders to the property owner just outside the fenced area. It wasn't fenced at the time, but we were standing on the city sidewalk side of Yonge Street. I clearly gave them, I explained the orders to the property owner. I'm not aware that people were going in and out of the building. And we met approximately 3 o'clock.
Okay, so would that not have been in contravention of that order?
If there wasn't a structural engineer with those people, then yes, that disturbs me if people were in and out of that building.
Okay, I was sitting with
given the unsafe condition the building's in.
I mean, if that's in question, I can provide a witness who was with me at the time that we saw that. We didn't know that the order had been issued, so we were just puzzling about it. Is it possible that the impact of the construction, or have we ever considered the impact of the construction that's happening next door on the Andron site, may have had some influence over what we see now in the condition of the Mayfair Hotel?
Unfortunately, I can't determine or predict what. All I can tell you is when I went in the building on April 13th, I saw unsafe conditions. They were consistent again on April 15th. So I can't explain how those conditions got to that state. It could be a number of factors in my experience.
Okay. When was the last time you or any of your staff were in that building?
So the last time that I was in the building was the summer of 2014. I was invited to tour the building with some other city staff to take a look at what the building looked like as a result of the interior finishes being removed from the building. It was a tour that probably lasted 30 minutes, and we toured 11 Yonge Street as well as the 156, 158. I mentioned earlier that My department issued a building permit to remove the interior finishes. That was issued in early 2014, and according to my inspector notes, the last time he was inside the building to do an inspection was May of 2014.
Mr. Niemer said that you received a report from his structural engineer in December about the concerns about the structure at that time. Why was there no other information shared with council about what was happening to the building or what they had found in that building?
I did not receive an engineer's report on 11 Yonge Street until Monday, April 13th. And in fact, I received 2 engineer reports. I received the December 2014 engineer report that the property owner referenced, and I received a second report from the same engineer the following day as a result of our inspection on the 13th of April. So I want to make it clear, I did not see an engineer's report dated 2014
until after the incident.
Yes, on April 13th.
Okay. Am I out of time?
You're out of time, Councillor
Okay, I'll come back. Thank you.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Mr. Sealing, what is your primary role as the chief building official with regards to this matter?
Oops, hang on. Sorry. Go ahead.
My primary role as the chief building official for the City of Kitchener is to administer and enforce the Building Code Act and the Building Code. It is to ensure buildings are built in compliance with the Ontario Building Code, or people can exceed the Building Code, and to ensure that applicable law is met so that buildings are safe for the occupants of the building. They don't have to be concerned about life safety, health, fire safety issues, and that they're structurally sound. And my role also includes when buildings get into condition just like the situation that we're describing at 11 Yonge Street.
Are you the only person who can order a demolition of this nature?
Correct.
So having heard your opinion and the review that you've done, would another review or assessment factor into your decision, or would it factor into your decision if there was another review or assessment done?
I have made my decision based on the inspections, the facts. 2 independent building condition assessments concur. I agree with them. So another assessment is not necessary, and I wouldn't support it. I've made a decision. There's an imminent safety threat here for the people that would be working inside the building, as well as the people that are outside the building.
And you've made it very clear in your report that no one will be allowed in the building to do anything further. Is that correct?
That is correct. The exception to that is the building code requires that in order to demolish the building because of its size, that an engineer needs to describe the construction and the demolition process, so that during the demolition, that people, the public, people in adjacent buildings are not adversely affected. I'm not at this time. I don't know if the property owner's engineering consultant that has done the previous reports is going to be doing the same one. So the engineer may have to get back in the building to do that assessment.
Okay. It was mentioned by one delegation about the potential of saving the front facade. Not that you would have the immediate answer to that, but if we moved forward with this, or when we move forward with this, because you're ordered the demolition, is it possible that you could look at the feasibility of saving that front facade, or is that something that you've already looked at?
We have considered the facade on the King Street and Yonge Street as part of reviewing the whole building, and unfortunately we cannot save it.
And then my last question, and then I'd like to bring forward the motion at the appropriate time. What happens if we don't remove the intent to designate?
Ms. McDonald?
I thought I may trend on legal opinion there, so.
I think I would remind council that on Monday you were given some advice in caucus with respect to that question. I know that 3 members of council may have been absent and didn't hear that advice. If you feel it's necessary, we can adjourn into caucus, but I would suggest to you it's not something that should be made public without discussion in caucus first.
I'll leave that for now, gauge the discussion that we have, and if required, I will recommend that closer to the end of the meeting, if needed. Thank you.
Okay.
And I do have the motion.
I will come back to you for the motion then. Councillor Gazzola.
I'm not going to ask you about your qualifications or your staff or the people you hired. I'm totally satisfied. Is he here? Just a few questions. What did it cost for you to hire the engineer to do what their check?
I can't hear you. Can you sorry.
What was the cost of the engineer that you hired to do your analysis, your review?
The good news is I haven't received the invoice. I would expect the costs for the assessment to be in the amount of $2,000 to $5,000.
Well, can you break that range just a little closer? That's a big range.
I'm sorry?
Closer than... Okay, let's settle at 2,500, okay?
Okay.
If everything goes according to your plans so far, when will we, in your position, be in a safe position as far as no risk involved?
Can
you give me a date? You must know.
Well,
give me an approximate date.
When will I feel safe? When the unsafe condition has been removed from 11 Yonge Street. So what I can tell you is I need council to remove the intention for the designation. The next step is the property owner has applied for a demolition permit. They've paid for it. I need an engineer's report describing the construction and the demolition process. At that point, I'll be in a position to issue a demolition permit on Monday, assuming that went well, because there needs to be a notice of the decision that council makes today. And I have to wait till after that notice is published. So if all the dominoes line up, the demolition permit could be issued on Monday, April 27th. That would be the earliest.
Okay, that's issued then, and then when would the structure start to come down?
As soon as the permit is issued, demolition could start. I don't control when the.
No, I'm just asking for your best estimate.
It could start. It could start right away.
And could it be done by the end of next week?
The demolition?
Yes. Could it be to the point where it's a safe condition by the end of next week?
So I'm not a demolition contractor, and I haven't seen the engineer's report on the demolition process. So could it be done by Friday, pending weather, pending how many resources they put onto it, whether they need to close King Street, because we've only closed part of Yonge Street right now.
I'm not to hold you. I'm just trying to get a concept of how much time, because there are questions about a third review, and I'm just trying to get an idea of what the timing is. So.
I would feel better once I get the engineer's report. I'd be able to answer that with clear information. I'm not intentionally trying to skirt the question.
Okay, and this will be. I was going to say my last question. I'm just curious, and I don't know if you can answer this, as to why council didn't deal with this on Monday when we were here, because by that time there was an awful lot of information out and if time is of the essence, why couldn't we have saved 2 or 3 days here?
My staff visited the site approximately 2:30 in the afternoon on Monday, April 13th. They were there for about 15 minutes, and they came back and they said, Mike, you need to come over and take a look at this. The building's in bad shape. So I was on site approximately 3 p.m. on Monday afternoon. I don't know what time committee was. I have no idea what time you were in committees till.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. My final question, and I just would like your opinion on this, and I'm not questioning your abilities, your staff's abilities, or who you hire, but I'm just asking, is it possible to get what I'm calling a third opinion, and I'll amplify that at another time, but to get another opinion, is it possible to do? I'm not saying whether it's the wisest thing, but is it possible?
So, possible in the sense that you can't access the building. No, it's not. It's not possible because you can't access the building. So, I already have 2 engineering reports, independent, saying the same thing, and plus my own opinion.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
not
Councillor Gazzola, the 5 minutes is up, so if you...
I just leave me another 30 seconds, okay? I'm not asking you to support this. I'm just saying, is it possible? Is it possible to at least review the reports? And I questioned you yesterday about this fact that there will be some other people going into that building, so that will happen. Okay, otherwise, as of today, as of last week, nobody else. There will be other people going into the building. I'm just saying, is it possible to get another opinion?
Okay, I'm going to say no. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Mike, when you were looking at getting engineers in there to give us the reports, did you give any thought to getting a heritage-type expert in to do a similar report?
The Building Code Act and the Building Code do not require such expertise or to be a member of. However, as being a professional building department, we rely on people that are competent in their field, that are professional and that have expertise in this, and that the City of Kitchener has used MT services before. I've been satisfied with their services. They've just recently helped with the restoration of another multi-wythe brick building. They serve to be helpful, so I had no issues, had every bit of confidence in retaining MT consultants.
Okay. And as a couple of examples, with Barra Castle and Forsyth buildings, did we get any kind of heritage expert opinions on those before we demolished?
I don't know.
Okay. Thanks for your help. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to be, in relation to motion, I'm going to be moving that we defer. I don't know what priority that takes. Defer while we get this additional report. So I don't know the order of voting on that, but just to inform you of that.
Okay. Well, at the time, I will take the motion. I will then take a deferral motion if there is one, because that would be the process. And if the deferral carries, that obviously would take precedence. We may want to get further legal advice before taking that action in light of Ms. McDonald's earlier comments. Councillor Yanetsky, you're up next.
Thank you. I do have 2-3 questions to ask you, Mr. Sealing, but first of all, I just want to mention that this morning, over the last couple hours, in terms of your presentation and your being questioned, I must compliment you on your professionalism here before us. It's excellent. In terms of the questions I want to ask you, you mentioned that the Forsyth building was demolished back a number of years ago, and you had been working with the city here for some over 20 years, and you were involved in that to some degree. Were you part of the decision-making there, or were you partially involved in going through that building to determine its status in terms of where it should be demolished or not? Help me out back. And I'm just trying to compare the two buildings in terms of the problems.
When the building department did an inspection on the Forsyth building, the chief building official at the time was Jim Whitmer. I was a manager of building at the time. I walked through the building along with the structural engineer in addition to Jim Whitmer. I attended the council meeting when Jim Whitmer presented the report and his findings to council. I did it for a number of reasons. I wanted to show support for the chief building official. I wanted the experience for myself, and I wanted to see how the process works. So I'm familiar with that. I gained a lot of experience as to the Building Code Act issues for Forsyth.
And Jim Whitmer, at that point in time, being a chief building official, made the decision to have it demolished.
Jim Whitmer made the decision to demolish the building, yes.
Okay. I do remember you going through this and the whole process, because I was on the Heritage Committee at the time back a number of years ago, and also concerned about saving the building and going through this whole process, so I can appreciate that, but I didn't know what your role specifically was in that. In your staff report that we have before us here, you talk about the preservation of heritage features, and I think you probably had worked with Leon Benson-Son on this, and that prior to demolition, some measured drawings have to be done, colored photos, and then during the demolition process, try to salvage some of the parts of the building, the balustrade, staircase, terrazzo floor, etc. Help me understand how this is going to take place and saving some of this material. Would this be done prior to demolition happening or after the building's demolished? Or how can you save something when the building's already sort of been destroyed? How do you save some of this stuff? When do you do it? Help me out.
So I would like to compliment Leon, because Leon Benson has provided some information as part of my report. And in terms of the preservation of heritage features subtitle, this information was supplied by Leon. In terms of the measured drawings of the exterior, those drawings may exist today. I don't know. In terms of having to measure along the Yonge Street building, it's fenced off, so that can't be done. But the rear of the building and the front of the building, people, if the drawings aren't available now, that could easily be done. We do have some information on file. For example, I have a copy of the site plan, so I know how long the building is. In terms of the metal balustrade of the staircase, I can tell you that from the 2 times I was in the building last week, there are some stairs with no guards. There's one metal balustrade that I believe has the M in it. And the owner has, when he applied for the building permit, he advised to me that if that can be salvaged through the contractor and the engineer, that all efforts will be made, provided it does not adversely affect the structure and people's lives aren't going to be in jeopardy. In terms of the rest of the materials, from what I see, are the exterior. So it's the bricks. There's 2 different colors of bricks on the building. There's the original 1905 building, and then there's the 1929 building on top. So those bricks can be salvaged quite easily without jeopardizing the safety of the public or the workers. The same thing with the concrete pilaster capitals. I refer to them as buttons, and there's cornices, stones. Those can be saved very easily with like a zoom boom. So I'm very comfortable those items can be safely taken down from the building without putting people's lives at risk.
Okay, appreciate that.
Okay, Councillor Yanitsky, your time's up if you want to key in again.
Yep.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Mayor Vanovic. Mike, in KLG's letter, she posed a question, and I would just like to pose that question to you. It said, did Mr. Sealing ask MTE Consulting for recommendations on what it would take to repair the Mayfair Hotel to make it structurally sound?
That is absolutely correct. I didn't know. When MT was retained, they were told to come in and do a building condition assessment. They were not hired to come in and tell us how to demolish the building. They were asked to come in and take a look at the. We already knew the building was unsafe. We didn't know what the repairs consisted of. So I relied upon MT's knowledge and experience and expertise to talk about how could we make the building safe. Their report, their conclusion was we can't make it safe because we'll be jeopardizing people's lives, the people that are going to be working inside the building, and we would be putting people outside the building at risk.
Okay, so to be clear, your intention was to hopefully make the building safe.
100% yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. And I'm kind of glad that in earlier questions, your qualifications and your background was referenced, because I have complete confidence in your assessment of what you brought forward, Council, and it helps to show the breadth of expertise and knowledge that you bring forward to your position as well. But unfortunately, due to the way the building owner, the way he presented some of his information, it brought a concern that earlier council member referenced, but I think it was misunderstood by the councillor as to a report was brought in. I think the delegate had said that they had brought information as to the structural issues of the building back in December. Was that information brought forward to you, or you can't reference that information?
As I stated earlier, I did not receive the structural engineer's report.
No, not a report.
Yeah.
The delegate has said through conversation.
I was in a meeting in December with other city staff, and the property owner had his architect there, and they talked about they have 3 options for the building, and the 3 options were to renovate the building as they originally planned, based on the existing conditions. The second option would be to retain the facades. If I remember correctly, it was the King Street and Yonge Street facade, and then build an entire new structure internally. And the third option was to seek a demolition permit to demolish and build brand new. These were 3 options presented. Staff did not pick one, and there was no structural engineer as part of the meeting.
Good. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to be able to make comment on that. On the MTE report, I'm not going to go into exact detail. It's just going to reference some of the main points. In observation page, it speaks to, in B, a section of brick wall on the ground floor is bowing inward. In C, it says, in several locations due to deterioration of masonry, the ends of joists were visible. And D, on the 3rd floor, several beams appear to be pulled partially out of wall. And E, in the main floor, beam was found to be broken and sagging significantly. These are very obvious structural issues. Is it fair to say that these structural issues are well beyond of any related impact with the water main break? This is something that's throughout the whole building, as opposed to just on the foundation.
In my opinion, the water main break was in the basement. I'm told that the water filled up to the underside of the floor joists. There's signs that there was, when you go in the basement, there's signs that the water was at that level. So yes, I agree.
Yeah, all the points I reference are main level and upwards. And finally, there's conversation through earlier questions of asking another report be done. So frankly asking you, if another report or peer review was done, would it in any way change your opinion on the information that's already before you through your own observation and the extensive inspection that's already been done by MTE?
So another report is not required, not necessary in my opinion.
Let's just go hypothetical, if even if it were to be done, you're quite confident on the information that's already before you that the recommendations that you're bringing forward are sound?
I am very confident and stick by the recommendations and the actions that I've taken to date.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Sealing. I want to know, we've heard about some of these other buildings in Ontario, some of them within the region, that had been considered condemned. I don't know if they were also deemed unsafe for anybody to enter or not, but can you help us understand what is different here compared to, with the Mayfair Hotel and this need to demolish, as in your words, then compared to those other buildings?
So I'll use the Devereaux House because the structural engineer that we retained is the same structural engineer that repaired and restored that building. The Devereaux House, from my understanding, I've never been to the building, but I received a copy of the notice, and that's excellent news that the building was able to be remediated and not seen the wrecking ball. In the Devereaux House, it's my understanding it's a 1.5-story multi-wide brick building. It is my understanding that Mr. Rulin repaired the load-bearing brick that was supporting the roof. He designed a shoring system to support the roof, and the brick was able to be repaired, and that was part of a structural restoration. The difference between a 1.5-story house and a 6-story building that's adjacent to the public, the streets, it's a corner property. The type of construction of the 6-story building at the Mayfair is very consistent with the construction of the 1.5-story house. So that gives me more confidence in the engineer that we retained. It's the load-bearing walls are masonry multi-wythe brick. They are wood floor joists embedded into the tops of the walls, and there are some steel columns and beams that are offering support as well, in addition to built-up wood beams. So the type of construction is similar, but the magnitude of a 6-story building and a 1.5-story building, we're talking two different ends of the spectrum, in my professional opinion. Mm-hmm. They're both important, but repairing a 6-story building that has a number of structural deficiencies. If the foundation wall or the pier that are so close to one another, if one of them starts to collapse, it's going to cause, because the floor joists are not properly tied into the foundation wall or the second floor, if one of those two collapses or partially collapses, it's going to pull part of the floors down. On the third floor, we know the pier, 2 feet off the ground, has cracks in the pier, the same pier. It has cracks in the pier, and there's chunks of the masonry sitting on the floor. So if something happens to that pier on the ground floor, it is very conceivable that it's going to be a ripple effect, unfortunately, that it's going to keep cascading going up the building. And it's going to pull more parts of the structure, because the structures that are supposed to keep the wall intact are rotted. And once it starts to give way, it's going to collapse around that area. But I don't believe the whole building's going to collapse at once. Otherwise, we would have closed down King Street, we would have closed down the laneway. It's right. Centralized, and all these structural unsafe issues are in the same area.
So have you seen, another question then, have you seen the drawings to understand, the fourth to sixth stories are set back, right, from they're not immediately on top of the first 3 stories. So do we know what those additional stories are being supported by?
Load-bearing multi-wythe masonry walls on that part of the building.
Yeah, okay. And so, last question. I'm trying to picture how it would happen, but would it at all be possible in the next step to see how we could save the and I know this question was asked, but I'm trying to ask it in a different way to see if there's another way to get the answer I want. But could we save the facade facing King Street if we were to get an expert in this type of salvaging, even if demolition has to occur? Could we save is there a potential way we could save the facade of the first 3 stories facing King?
As part of our assessment of the building by MTE, the decision on that has been, no, unfortunately we can't. We can't salvage that part of the building.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Sealing. You're answering a lot of tough questions, and it's been a while, so I appreciate it. I only have one, and it's hopefully to maybe guide some of the discussion, as I've heard a few times now, about getting some extra third or fourth opinion, and I want to be 100% clear. Even if council were to unanimously approve some sort of getting some sort of third or fourth opinion, it is not within our ability to let someone else in that structure. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So that would limit any sort of review to simply looking at what's already been compiled or from outside of the building.
Correct.
Okay. And finally, within that context, would that report be of, in your opinion, of any value in terms of whether or not the structure should come down?
Can you just repeat the first part? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Certainly. In your opinion, if a report were to come back of that nature, would it be of any value whatsoever or influence? Notwithstanding your earlier comments, it's not required. Would a purely external review or review of existing reports be of any value in terms of the building coming down or not?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, going into round 2, if I can ask people to focus their questions, because we're going way over time on this issue. Councillor Yanetsky.
Yes, actually, my question would be to the Mr. Rudlin, the consultant, if I can ask him a question.
Okay. Ask Mr. Sealing, and if he can't answer it, he will turn to the consultant.
Well, okay, I'll go mention that and then you can pass it on. He made in his presentation, in terms of his comments to us, his background as well as some of the buildings that he had been involved with from a heritage perspective and that he was directly involved in. And the question basically I'm asking to him is that from his experience in working with those buildings, and I don't know those buildings at all in any detail, how they are in terms of height, structure, size, or anything of that nature, how they would compare in terms of his expertise and involvement to restoring them versus the situation we have with the Mayfair Hotel.
Unfortunately, I don't know that.
Say the buildings that I listed, only the Devereaux House was one that was immediately a safety concern and was a building that was unsafe to enter. The other ones were simply heritage structures that were being renovated or being repaired for localized damage. Does that answer the question?
Well, it does in part. So the Devereaux House was the one that you was considered to be totally unsafe to be entered into, just like this one is?
In part, the back portion of the house was unsafe.
Okay, but then that's the difference in size, 6 stories versus 1.5 stories sort of scenario, right? Okay, that answers my question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernandez?
Yes. I think I may only have one more question. Mr. Sealing, have we ever had a large water main break along King Street in the last number of years that would have affected one of our buildings and done damage to the basement or the materials that were in that basement?
So I can answer the question, but I can't. So I'm not aware of any water main breaks that have occurred along properties downtown Kitchener that have affected the foundation of our buildings. I don't know how many I don't know how many water main breaks we've had, because I'm not familiar with all of them, but I'm not aware of any off the top of my head where a water service break has occurred and it's adversely affected the foundation wall.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's. I'm going to try and formulate a question on on discussion, we've heard very clearly that you're not interested, or you don't see that it would be of any benefit to have another review, that the review of the documents and reports of the engineers plus a outside exterior view by somebody with heritage expertise would not change your mind. Is there anything that would change your mind about, in the interim, not demolishing until we have an understanding about the heritage?
In my opinion, I've retained a design professional with historical restoration experience, so no, I will not consider.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I want to just briefly carry on from where we left off, and I specifically said, is it possible to get a third opinion? And you came out with a big, definite no today. Yesterday when we spoke, I thought we were at a maybe, but it's moved. I just want to ask a sort of a far out point. You know, we're in a technological city and region, and I've heard so much in the past recently about drones and how they're able to go in and look at buildings and look at situations where people can't get into. And we have in our region, we have a company, I know the individual that's involved with it, that is very efficient in this type of technology. So keeping that in mind, can I go back and say, is it possible to get a third opinion?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I have a couple questions, as there is nobody else, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Galloway-Seelock, for your motion. Mr. Sealing, you referenced earlier the fact that you've learned and watched and participated in a number of issues over your 23 years of experience. And one of the ones you referenced was Forsyth, and part of the reason you said you actually came to the council meeting was you wanted to observe, be supportive, and see what you learn. I guess I'm going to ask you then the question is, did you learn anything from that process? And did any of that shape how you handled this particular situation? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, I learned a lot of value added. One of the questions that was posed to the chief building official was, would you consider a second opinion? And at the end of the day, a second opinion was not considered. So when I did my inspection on April 13th, and I'm meeting with the property owner's engineer, and we're meeting on site in the afternoon, one of the things that I'm thinking about is I'm reflecting back on 2005, and I'm thinking I need to retain my own professional engineer to get a second opinion, and that's exactly what I did in this case. I retained the services of MT Consultants to get them to do a building condition assessment so that it could affirm my belief that the building was unsafe, and that MT could make recommendations out of how to remedy the unsafe condition, however that would be, temporary shoring, whatever. And the recommendation that came back was through demolition due to public safety outside and the workers inside.
Okay, and in the second question I have is, in selecting the consultant, while you weren't necessarily looking for heritage expertise, I mean, we heard today that this particular consultant, in fact, was involved with Devereux House specifically, and his firm has been involved in other ones, including his own peer review within his firm, before he actually gave you his opinion, which included someone with some heritage experience. Was your selection of MT factored in? Was the fact that MT has been involved in these kind of things, did that factor in your selection of them as the consultant?
To be honest, I was not aware that MT was involved with the Devereux House restoration. Retaining MT, as I stated earlier, is based on a long-standing working relationship with them. They're well respected in the region. I admire the passion of some of the previous delegations. I would love to be in a position to be able to remediate this building. It's not possible in this present condition.
Okay, and the last question I have is, and I don't know if this is a question for you or for Mr. Devereaux, sorry, the engineering consultant. Is there a difference between, when one is looking at a building with the lens of remedying where there's an unsafe condition potentially present and trying to determine how to remedy it, is there a difference between the kind of analysis you or an engineer would apply to a heritage building versus a regular building in that kind of instance? I mean, I guess my question is your primary focus in that instance is public safety, is it not?
The lens that's used for a heritage or historic building is the exact same lens that's used on a non-heritage building. The building code is the document that the structural engineer is using to compare against. What I like about the ACO membership is they're talking about, in my opinion, about the architectural preservation, windows, walls, guards on stairs, that sort of thing. We heard one of the delegates, they were talking about the exits out of the building. Those are architectural features. When you do a structural analysis, it's a structural analysis on the building, whether it's historic. The building code doesn't separate. If you've got a historic building, you have to do it this way, and if it's a if it's a 5-year-old building, you have to do it this way. It doesn't separate them. It's the same structural analysis, and that's what I expected of our consultant in this case.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I had. Councillor Galloway-Seelock for the motion.
Yeah, so I'm going to bring forward the recommendation by staff, which, without reading it, basically is to withdraw the notice of intent to designate. Would you like me to speak to?
You might as well speak to it right away, and then I'll go to Councillor Etherington for his deferral motion.
Okay. Hopefully he'll cooperate with me. I'm not happy to be here today, and I don't think that anyone really is. It's sad to see what's happening, but it's good to see that there's a number of features that are going to be saved potentially through the agreement of the property owner and the heritage features. So that's good news today. But it's sad to see this building come down. We have 3 opinions from experts. 3. It's not about the cost of another assessment. We've heard from our expert, the chief building official, that it isn't possible to get another opinion. We don't have the time because the public safety is at risk, not only the people who could potentially go in the building, but anybody in and around the building. So public safety is at risk, and I think that that's one of the most important things we need to look at. Mike Sealing is a staff person who has integrity and professionalism. There's been many of those comments around the table today. He's done his job and what he's hired to do, and now it's our opportunity, or we need to listen to him, because he is the expert, and we need to pass this motion. We can't say how great he is, and how professional he is, and how much integrity he has, and then not support him. Knowing Mike as I believe I do, he didn't come to this decision lightly and would look at all options to save and preserve the building. And in fact, in his own words, he said 100% effort was made to save the building. Another assessment doesn't change that our chief building official has ordered a demolition, so another assessment won't change that decision. Therefore, undue risk is being presented in order to prolong this by potentially getting another assessment. That risk is to the public. We are not ordering the demolition. That's the job of the chief building official. So I think I will go back to my comments from the beginning. I'm not happy to be here. I'm not happy to have to tear this building down. But we have the ability to preserve many features and make sure that that's incorporated into the new building. But it's a sad day to be here. But I think at the end of the day, we really do need to listen to our chief building official who has integrity and professionalism.
Thank you. Councillor Etherington.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll make some comments and then the recommendation.
Sorry, actually, before you do that, I forgot to get a seconder for Councillor Galloway-Seelock's motions. Councillor Singh? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Make some comments and then the deferral recommendation. Preservation and protection of Kitchener's few remaining heritage buildings, particularly those in the inner city, was one of my top priorities and promises when I ran for election in the downtown Ward 9. I want to keep that promise, particularly because of the fact various past councillors have, in my opinion, an extremely dubious, questionable record when it comes to protection of heritage buildings. Those councils voted to demolish historic buildings going all the way back to Old City Hall, more recently the Barra Castle, Forsyth Shirt Factory, and several Joseph Street outbuildings out behind the tannery. While appreciating and respecting current opinions regarding the safety of the Mayfair building, I don't see why we can't get a speedy report that could examine possible ways to save this important downtown structure, prepared by a professional heritage expert, qualified to comment on potential ways that could be used to save the building or save part of the building. And I think that should have been immediately done after we discovered the unsafe condition. Owners of heritage buildings in Kitchener, elsewhere in Waterloo Region, and in various municipalities in Ontario faced with similar demolition orders of historic buildings have used this process and managed to save condemned heritage structures. So I don't understand why we cannot do the same. In addition to getting such an opinion, I'd also like to see, and I'll come back to this later at Council, I would like to see a report from staff that deals with how we propose to preserve and protect other downtown buildings, particularly along King, from similar damage and resulting demolition orders. We have to preserve those buildings. For these and other reasons, I would move that the recommendation before Council to withdraw the heritage designation and demolish the Mayfair be deferred until a heritage expert is hired and investigates all potential ways to remediate the Mayfair or a section of the Mayfair and hopefully avoid the recommended demolition of the building. Now, considering the urgency of this matter, I would strongly suggest the matter be brought back to I believe it would be the May 11th council meeting. And I will also move that the site remain completely fenced, completely secured, until that report is completed. And through you, Mr. Chair, I would ask for a recorded vote on the proposal to defer.
Okay, so the way I'm going to handle this is I'm going to take a seconder on deferral, but I'm actually going to hold it in abeyance so that other people can comment. I'm going to give people that courtesy, and then I'll come back to your motion because I don't think we would need to go around twice. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Point of clarification and point of order. I believe in Councillor Etherington's motion it said to withdraw the heritage designation. It is not a heritage designated property. It's the intent to designate that needs to be removed. And the second piece would be if that is the motion that we're taking up, I believe it needs to be in writing in front of us.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay, if we can get that in writing, and I'll deal with the seconder once we have that. Continuing on then with comments, I think people are clear on what's being proposed and the deferral that's being proposed. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I will second that motion of.
Well,
when it comes.
Councillor Fernandez already said she would.
Okay. I'll step back. I would like to have a few minutes to comment on, and I want to start out by saying now's not the time to discuss what went wrong and who, if anyone, is responsible, and there was a great deal of time spent on that this morning. I limited my questions as to timing and to safety issues, and those are my concerns. I believe that the city has responsibility here. It is was about to be a designated heritage building. We owned it and we used it for a period of time. We also emptied it out and had it vacant and were responsible for it when it was empty. And we spent a great deal of money during that interim, not only first to buy that property, but secondly to maintain it. I want to deal quickly with the question of the opinions, and I'm not challenging any of the opinions. First, the developer got an opinion from someone that they hired, and that's rightfully so. Secondly, our chief building official, in his role as chief building official, hired a consulting engineer and got an opinion, and I don't have any concerns with that. I do have to think, though, that his opinion and his other outside professionals that he hired are really one opinion coming from his office as chief building official. And I'm sort of looking for a third opinion based on representing council and heritage. So I think we've spent over $600,000 just to maintain that building in the past few years. I would like to see us spend a couple more $1,000 to have one more quick look at this issue. I'm going to call that a peer review, and I know what I'm not blind, I've heard, and to me, a peer review would have to come up with some very dramatic findings to overrule the two previous reviews that we have on this building. But my only thoughts here is that it is an important issue. We've had somewhat of a bad, not the best track record in saving some of our heritage buildings. I would like to be able to say that we did everything possible in this case to try to save that building. And I believe that can be done. I believe it can be done within a very quick, short period of time without jeopardizing any question of safety. And I think there are ways of doing inspections, even internally, without jeopardizing safety. And the least is to have a review of both reviews that have been done now. That has not taken place. We've had the reviews of one. So I will support Councillor Etherington's recommendation for deferral.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Verbanovic. Today is a sad day for our city. Prior to today's meeting, I was prepared to take a pause with the withdrawal of intention to designate. I have fond memories of the hotel and in the center block in particular. Center block has gone through a lot of transition over the years, and the hotel in my mind was one of, if not the second last jewel in the block. Out of all the buildings that the city classifies as heritage, 95% of them, in my opinion, don't really have any significance as the Mayfair does. It's a shame that we are here today in the state of the Mayfair. But when there is overwhelming evidence that supports that the building is unsafe, we cannot ignore that. It'd be foolish. How bad would we look if a disaster occurred, knowing that we ignored the professional advice? I guess the only silver lining we have here is we have an owner that has an impeccable reputation, who respects and cares about our downtown as much as we do. So I know we're in good hands. With that, I will regretfully support the removal of the intention to designate, and I won't be supporting Councillor Etherington's deferral.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief as well. we have 3 reviews, and the notion that, 3 opinions, and the notion that a 4th one from someone who can't even enter the building is somehow going to upset the other 3, it's just not believable. I respect that people want to do everything that's possible to maintain this heritage property, but I think we're grasping at straws, and what we're doing is delaying the inevitable. Everything here, there's no villains. I mean, a water main broke that caused the situation. The owner and developer has a history for his respect for heritage. It's just an unfortunate situation, and while I completely understand the intention of members of council to try and protect it, I start to worry when, elected though we may be, we are lay people, and when we start turning away the opinions of the professionals because it's not the response that we want to hear, that's when I start to worry. I will not support the amendment, and I will support the removal to designate.
Councillor Marsh.
Just earlier this week, we were here around this horseshoe on a much happier note, looking at the cultural heritage landscape study, and it is a beautiful documentation of all the cultural heritage landscapes that we have here, and sadly, the Mayfair is included in the downtown cultural heritage landscape. As the ward councillor that the Mayfair is located within, I feel very much, very sad that we are here at this point, and I feel that as a brand new councillor, I've inherited, and many of us were not here earlier when previous councils had to make similar decisions, and I would like for us to see going forward a shift. I would like us to not wait until we get to this point beyond return and seek to protect the heritage properties that we still have. And so that is why I feel we need to, at a different meeting, at a different time, move forward on changing how we go about doing this. We should have measures in place so that we stop this legacy of seeing heritage buildings needing to be demolished. I would like to be able to say that, absolutely I support Councillor Etherington's deferral motion, but I feel that we would have too much time between now and then. But at the same time, I am torn because the heritage. If we had a heritage expert look at the findings, perhaps that could be a learning experience for how to avoid this situation going forward. So I'm undecided at this point as to where I stand, but in terms of what to do next. But regardless, even if we withdraw the intention to designate at this point, I would like to see us retain a heritage expert to understand how we can move forward without getting to this point again with any other properties.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And similar to what was said earlier, on Monday evening's Planning Committee, the council members supported unanimously to support the cultural heritage landscape study, as well as listing those properties and areas, clearly showing the strength and support for preservation of heritage significant properties and landscapes. But that aside, the issue with this building and the decision that will be made today will be with great reluctance by all of us, and it's clear to see from the comments that have already been said. But beyond preservation, we also are entrusted for public safety. And there is no question of the building's current severe and dangerous condition. And also, it's clear the risk to public safety. As elected representatives of our community, this should be our primary concern. I appreciate the intent and desire to continue looking for alternative options to save, but the report that's before us, it's very explicit and clear that the building is in severe jeopardy of, in danger of falling, causing harm, and of course the issues of allowing others to go inside to do further inspections. Based on that, we have to move forward, reluctantly, but we have to move forward in the interest of public safety. And so I will reluctantly not be able to support the deferral, and also reluctantly will support the motion.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I have a quick question of Mr. Sealing. Were there pictures or any videos taken of the interior of the building when you or the consultant from MTE entered the building, and does Mr. Niemer have any pictures of the interior of the building?
So on Monday, April 13th and Wednesday, April 15th, both the City of Kitchener and the property owner took pictures. And as part of transparency, the communication staff set up a website on the city's internet site. And we have pictures up there. We've had pictures up there for almost a week, if not more, that show some of the pictures of the structural situations that we've described over the last few hours.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to ask Councillor Etherington, you've stated that May 11th council meeting, but in the light of the information that Ms. Algie brought to us, that there were two people who were willing to go and were immediately prepared to go and look at the information about Mayfair Hotel, would you move that to the 2nd of May when we have committee day and we could have a special council?
No problem.
Okay. So, you know, in light of Councillor Gazzola's comments about, you know, blame and whose fault and that, I've sort of revised my comments publicly, is that although there may or may not be some blame, there does seem to be some timelines here that I'm a little bit concerned about. And the fact that in December, the structural engineer report was brought to some of our staff, and that there were discussions about 3 different options, one of which those options was to demolish. I realized that the owner at the time could not have demolished because he had to go through the following process, which would be to not designate the site. That being said, it is concerning, of course, that the Mayfair Hotel, which represents a historic piece of history, and you know, we all receive the doors open, and it talks about discover the story behind every door. And behind the doors of the Mayfair Hotel is a whole bunch of stories. And I think that I'm not prepared at this point in time without that additional opinion from somebody who understands heritage and architectural features, even if it is only through pictures and an outside walking around. I think there is enough history and enough information about the Mayfair Hotel and the buildings that he or she could bring us some additional information for us to consider. It's concerning that the building has been subjected to additional weather conditions since December, since we learned about since Mr. Niemer and our staff learned about the structural concerns. But I think that there could be an opportunity somehow, and I think Ms. Algie said it, nothing is impossible. Even Councillor Gazzola's suggestion about using drones, maybe that sounds a little far-fetched and scientific, but we have come so far in what we have done in our engineering, in our planning, in the way we view things. And why not open that door? Why not take a look through that door of possibility? So I will be supporting Councillor Etherington's proposal to defer. even Mr. Sealing stated that demolition may start on April 27th, but he's not sure himself. So I think one more week, the way the building is secured, we would not be putting anybody at risk. So I'm hoping, although I have my doubts, that this motion that Councillor Etherington has put forward will pass. It would be May the 4th, thank you. So we would change that from May 11th to May the 4th.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Yanetsky.
There's a lot to digest here in terms of all the information that we've been given and all the expertise information that we have been given and trying to make a reasonable judgment. I've been involved in Heritage for a number of years, sitting on Heritage Committee back from my early days in the 80s, and even as a Heritage Rep member, as a staff person, then back the last 10 years or so as a councillor and as a layperson. I have been through the Forsyth building, I have been through Barra Castle, and I've been through the Mayfair building over the years on a few occasions when we were monitoring and trying to determine its qualities that need to be preserved, as well as looking at the various damages that have taken place over the years to those particular buildings. And I'll just comment on them briefly. Barra Castle, I was clearly involved with that on the Heritage Committee, walked through it several times with the owners and their consultant engineers. And the building was built very poorly and was crumbling without any building permits issued and in contravention to building codes back at the time, and eventually needed to be demolished. And that was not by neglect, it was just poor workmanship over the construction period over the many years. Forsyth building, I was involved with that. And of course the city owned it for that time, and I was quite involved in coming forth before council and arguing with council to preserve the building. And of course, the city had ownership of it, and its ownership was stewardship by neglect. Yeah, we own it, but we won't do anything about it. The ceiling was open, rain poured in, floors were warping, and a variety of other issues. And eventually it did get demolished as well. The Mayfair building, on the other hand, has not really been neglected. The city owned it for a number of years. They've done their maintenance to it. Staff have been in there on a very timely basis, done their stewardship to it, had fire to detect systems set up, and did a reasonable job to maintain it. And now, being on Heritage Committee, I was satisfied with what staff was doing. Then the ownership went to Bernie Neimer as the current owner, and as he indicated this afternoon, he maintained it and was working in a forward motion to maintain it as best as possible. And unfortunately, when the drywalls and all the insides sort of came apart, you could sort of see the structure to it. Some challenges were raised for him to work on. I totally respect the comments of the chief building official. Mike Sealing has done an excellent job in terms of his comments. I totally respect his objective of trying to save the building. I know he had worked with Leon Betsanson, the heritage planner, to get his position on heritage components, but of course Mike Sealing's position as a chief building official tied in with the building code and his responsibilities there. I respect his integrity, I respect his experience over the years. I have worked with him for a number of years when I was a staff person, and I highly think much of his integrity and knowledge. I appreciate hearing the comments from the delegations, from the ACO, some others, some emails that we have received over the last week to try to save the building and get a third opinion, etc. I think they're worthy comments, and I think they are truly representative of the community who wants to be involved and save the building. The buck stops with council here. Being on Heritage Committee right now, I would like to save the building, but somehow I feel that the decision-making has already been made, by the chief building official. It's his duty, and he's doing his job. Even though we want to go ahead and try to get a third opinion, which is possible, I'm not too sure how strong it'll be, whether they'll be able to get in the building, which I know it's not going to happen, and just try to work from photographs, drawings, opinions, reviewing the other the engineering reports, structural reports. I'm not too sure how strong that would be. And even though we want to move forward and try to defer this to the May 4th meeting, which is in a couple of weeks roughly, about 10 days or so, the building could be already on its way being demolished, and it could be too late. And this could be just a redundant process or an exercise that we're going through. I'm very saddened that we have to make a decision. It's a tough decision. I want to use common sense and say that, yes, we should just tear the building down. Yet at the same time, being a heritage person, I want to save it. I'm not too sure what's going to happen over the next 10 days. It's a decision that we have to make here at Council tonight or this afternoon. And it's a decision that may not have any value because the building could be down by then. But on the other hand, it could still be safe because the ball is, once the permit's issued, then there's a process that has to take place, and it could not be down by the May 4th meeting date. So there is an outside chance that that could happen. So reluctantly, and I'm reluctantly on both sides of the scenario, I'm going to support the deferral because I feel there's an opportunity, but if the chief building official has to do his duty, I totally respect that.
Okay, and if I can just make my comments. I too am very disappointed and saddened, to be frank, that we're facing this issue, and that another building that had what I believe was much potential to add to the architectural landscape of our community is facing this situation. But I've tried to listen to all of the information that's been put before us and to read through the information that's been shared with us and with the public in terms of being as transparent as we can on this issue. And I want to thank our communications staff for making all of this available on the website so that the community was aware of all of the information that had been shared with council. For me, this boils down to a couple issues. First of all, what is the role of council in this issue? And the role of council is purely around whether or not we decide to remove the intent to designate or we keep it in place. And the issue of how the demolition proceeds is out of our control. That is a statutory responsibility given by the laws of Ontario to our chief building official. So I think we need to keep that in mind when we're dealing with this issue. I was heartened by the fact that our chief building official talked about his Forsyth experience earlier today and talked about the fact that one of the things he learned in that experience was that perhaps we should go and get a second opinion. Guess what? He actually did that. He didn't wait for council to suggest it. He went proactively and did that. And I think it speaks to the professionalism, integrity, knowledge, and experience that we have in Mike Sealing in terms of fulfilling that role. That role has a very difficult responsibility of trying to balance what they know was the desire of the city and of the community from a heritage perspective with the responsibilities over public safety. They went and hired external independent advice to inform them in making that decision. And as it happens, they hired a firm that actually has experience. May not be officially an ACO approved firm, but they hired a firm and an individual who's had experience in dealing with these kinds of buildings. And so I can't help believe that they've informed themselves as much as they can to make the best decision possible. Do we now go for another opinion? So let's say this one comes back and says, well, maybe you can do something. Okay, so now we're 3 versus 1. Do we then go for another one and see where that one's like? Like, how far do we keep taking this? At some point, we have to rely on the professionals that we've entrusted in our organization. And those people have said that this building is beyond being repaired, and more importantly, it's a threat to public safety. And I, for one, am not prepared to simply defer this and delay the inevitable. It is regrettable that we are in this situation, but I'm not prepared to put potentially people's lives at risk by deferring this decision. And quite frankly, even if we did defer it, it's putting us in a very difficult situation between the statutory responsibility of our chief building official and where council is, and with how council is dealing with this issue. And I think that would be a very, very dangerous precedent to set, and it's not somewhere where I would advise any member of council to take this organization. So, as regretful as this is, I will not be supporting the deferral, and I will be supporting Councillor Galloway-Seelock's motion. Okay, so the motion has been, the deferral motion has been moved and seconded by Councillors Etherington and Fernandez. Recorded vote on the deferral has been requested. You can vote now. Okay, all those in favor of the deferral? All those opposed? Councillor Marsh, I really wasn't going around a second time. You clicked in. I did click in. Okay.
At the appropriate time, I'd like to make another motion.
Another motion?
A different motion, yeah.
Okay, like an amendment or?
No.
Okay, I will come back to you, but I will just alert you that, I mean, depending on the issue, it may require notice to waive motion. So let's deal with the Councillor Galloway-Seelock's motion. If we can turn on the voting. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried, and we'll now go to you, Councillor Marsh. Can you click in, please? Go ahead.
Thank you. I realize we've been here a long time, much longer than we had scheduled. I just want to add another motion before we close today, that staff be directed to report to Council on best practices regarding preservation of heritage buildings going forward, so that we can find a way to decrease the number of times that we're back here in the future.
Okay, and I think I'll maybe look to our acting CAO. I will note that I do understand this issue is going to, a report on this and the broader issue is going to Heritage Kitchener on the 5th. Mr. Chapman.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, your understanding is correct. They are meeting on May the 5th, and it's my understanding through Mr. Ben-Sasson that there are really two issues at hand. One is the proposal on this building specifically with respect to the reuse of the materials that may be salvaged. And then a number of Heritage Kitchener members have raised similar questions that you've raised around what does this mean in terms of a program that the city would run to ensure that heritage buildings are maintained until they're suitable for reuse. So I think that that's well on the radar now of Heritage Kitchener for May the 5th.
Okay. So I will do you want to give that as direction to staff to bring a report back then?
Yeah, I would.
Okay, and to take it to Heritage Kitchener first?
Yeah, to take it to Heritage Kitchener first.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Fernandez. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I have a simple little request that after we dealt with the Forsyth building, there were some changes to our property standards regulations for heritage buildings. And a report was written and some action was taken. I'm just asking that, is it possible to circulate that to members of council just for their information?
Okay, that will be done. Councillor Fernandez?
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. I thought I was turning Councillor Gazzola off. Go ahead.
My question would be, is there any ability for us to understand the impacts of the demolition when we get that report next week on the impact of the next number of buildings? Is there a way that we can have some understanding about that?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Seeling.
Through the mayor, that yes, the building division would be more than happy to communicate with council and the residents and our citizens of Kitchener as to how this will impact the adjacent property. It's going to impact the sidewalk on King Street. So yes, we will definitely do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Sorry to prolong this. I just want to ask that, I guess it would be a staff report, I don't think it would take too long, but to review the heritage buildings that we have saved. I think we're often quick to say what we've torn down, but we've saved a lot of buildings too, and I think we don't do a very good job of saying that. Well, it's very regrettable we're here today talking about the Mayfair. I think we need to do a better job at telling the public what we do save. And I have an example in the EB house that was moved, that was saved and preserved in my neighborhood. And so I think we need to do a better job of that too, because we're always quick to say the iconic buildings that we've lost, which is true and which is regrettable. But I do agree we need to work on a program as well to try and better assist those with heritage buildings.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a motion for 2 readings of the bylaws? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis, seconded by Councillor Davey. All those in favour? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Yanetsky's, Councillor Schneider. All those in favour? Opposed? That's carried.